Every tired mind you see during the day carries a secret storm when the night finally comes. When the room grows still, when the screens go dark, when the world stops pulling at you from every direction, what rises is everything you kept buried beneath movement. The thoughts that will not sit down, the pressure that follows you into bed, the fears that grow louder in silence, and the mental weight you keep carrying, even when your body is begging for rest. Not because you are broken, but because no one ever showed you how to let the mind come home. We were taught how to survive busy days, but not how to enter peaceful nights. We learned how to keep going, how to stay useful, how to push through exhaustion like it was something to be proud of. But very few of us were taught how to slow the mind without guilt, how to release the day without replaying it, how to lie down without bringing every burden of life into the dark with us. So the body gets in bed, but the mind keeps running. The Stoics understood something most people still miss. A restless mind is not cured by more effort. It is calmed by truth, by perspective, by learning to see your thoughts without becoming trapped inside them. Marcus Aurelius knew that peace begins the moment you stop arguing with what already happened, the moment you stop trying to control what the night was never meant to solve, the moment you return to yourself with honesty instead of pressure. Tonight, that is what this journey is for. 4 hours to quiet the inner noise. 4 hours to loosen the grip of overthinking. 4 hours to set down the invisible burdens that have followed you for too long. This is not just about sleep. It is about resetting the mind that carries your life. And before this night is over, something inside you may finally remember what stillness feels like. And now that the mind has slowed down just enough to hear itself again, something important begins to surface. Beneath the noise, beneath the habits, beneath the endless motion, there is a quiet truth waiting to be faced. The way you end your day is the way you carry your life, because what you refuse to release at night follows you into tomorrow. There is a heaviness that builds slowly, almost unnoticed. It is not something you can touch, yet you feel it pressing against your chest when the day is over. It is made of unfinished thoughts, unspoken words, expectations you did not meet, and fears about what still lies ahead. Most people lie down with this weight still clinging to them. They close their eyes, but their mind refuses to rest, because it is still holding everything together, as if letting go would cause everything to fall apart. But here is the truth that changes everything. Not everything you carry is yours to keep. The Stoics understood that much of human suffering comes from holding on to things that were never within our control to begin with. The mind replays conversations, trying to rewrite them. It holds on to outcomes, trying to guarantee them. It builds scenarios for tomorrow, trying to feel prepared. But none of this creates peace. It only tightens the grip. Ending the day without carrying the world on your chest begins with a simple shift. You stop treating every thought as a responsibility. When something difficult happens during the day, the mind marks it as unfinished. It tells you, this needs to be solved before you can rest. But that is not always true. Some things are not meant to be solved in one night. Some things require distance, not pressure. When you try to force closure, you only deepen the tension. So instead of asking yourself, how do I fix everything before I sleep? You begin asking a different question. What is truly mine to carry right now? You will start to notice that most of what weighs on you does not belong to the present moment. It belongs to the past, which cannot be changed, or it belongs to the future, which has not yet arrived. And yet, the mind treats both as urgent, as if holding on to them gives you power. But the Stoic mind learns to separate effort from attachment. You did what you could today. You spoke as you knew how. You acted based on the understanding you had in that moment. That is where your responsibility ends. The rest, the reactions of others, the outcomes, the judgments, those are not yours to control. And if they are not yours to control, they are not yours to carry into the night. There is a quiet strength in allowing the day to be incomplete. Most people resist this because they believe peace only comes when everything is resolved. But that kind of peace is fragile. It depends on the world behaving exactly as you want it to, and life does not work that way. Stoicism offers a different kind of peace, one that does not require perfection, only acceptance. Acceptance does not mean you approve of everything that happened. It means you stop fighting what already exists. It means you recognize that the day has ended, whether you are satisfied with it or not. And in that recognition, something begins to loosen. The body starts to follow the mind. When you stop mentally holding on to every detail, your breathing softens. The tightness in your chest begins to ease. The constant scanning for problems slows down. It is not because everything is solved. It is because you are no longer demanding that it be solved right now. Marcus Aurelius would often remind himself that the world continues without his constant interference, that life unfolds whether he clings to it or not. This is not a loss of control. It is a return to reality. You begin to understand that rest is not a reward for finishing everything. It is a necessity for facing anything at all. Carrying the world into your sleep does not make you stronger. It only exhausts you. It drains the clarity you will need tomorrow. It keeps you trapped in a cycle where each day begins already weighed down by the last. So the practice becomes simple, but not easy. At the end of the day, you pause. You look at everything that is still unresolved, and instead of pulling it closer, you gently place it outside of yourself. Not forever, but for now. You acknowledge it without attaching to it. You accept that tomorrow will come, and you will meet it with a clearer mind if you allow yourself to rest tonight. This is how the weight begins to lift. Not all at once, but slowly, thought by thought, tension by tension, until you realize that the heaviness was never permanent. It was something you kept picking up again and again without noticing. And for the first time in a long time, you lie down, not as someone trying to control everything, but as someone who trusts that it is okay to let go. And once you begin to set down what was never yours to carry, another truth slowly comes into view. The weight on your chest was not only coming from life itself. Part of it was coming from the way the mind was treating you in the dark. Because sometimes the night is not heavy only because of what happened during the day, but because of what your own thoughts keep doing to you after the day is over. There is a quiet kind of pain that does not leave bruises, yet it drains the spirit all the same. It happens when the lights go out and the mind turns against itself. Not with shouting, but with repetition. Not with visible force, but with pressure that keeps tightening. A thought returns, then another, then the same one in a harsher tone. You should have done better. You should have seen it coming. Why did you say that? What if tomorrow goes wrong too? The body is still, but inside something is striking again and again. This is the hidden violence of overthinking at night. Most people do not call it violence because it looks normal from the outside. There is no sound, no broken objects, no witness. But what else do you call a habit that robs your peace, weakens your strength, and leaves you exhausted before sleep has even begun? The mind becomes both attacker and victim. One part throws fear, shame, and pressure. The other part absorbs it until the whole inner world feels unsafe. What makes nighttime overthinking so powerful is the silence around it. During the day, distractions protect you, work interrupts you, conversations pull your attention away. Noise gives the mind less room to spiral. But when night arrives, there is no crowd to hide inside. The mind is left alone with itself, and if it has been trained in self-attack, the silence becomes a battlefield. Marcus Aurelius understood something that still matters now. A thought is not automatically the truth, just because it appears in your mind. He trained himself to step back and look at what the mind was presenting him. He did not bow to every impression. He examined it. He asked whether it was useful, whether it was accurate, whether it deserved power. This is what saves a person from mental aggression. Not fighting every thought with more force, but learning not to believe every thought the moment it arrives. Overthinking feels like problem solving, but much of the time it is self-punishment wearing the mask of responsibility. The mind says it is trying to prepare you, but what it is often doing is keeping you trapped in the pain of uncertainty. It keeps replaying a mistake, not to learn from it, but to reopen the wound. It keeps predicting disaster, not because disaster is certain, but because the mind thinks constant alertness will somehow prevent suffering. In this way, overthinking becomes a form of inner control. The mind would rather exhaust itself than sit in the discomfort of not knowing. But exhaustion is not wisdom. There is a difference between reflection and attack. Reflection is calm. It looks at a thought and says, "This happened, this mattered, this can teach me something." Attack is harsher. It says, "This happened, therefore you are a failure." Reflection creates understanding. Attack creates fear. Reflection leaves room for growth. Attack makes the whole self feel condemned. At night, many people confuse the second for the first. They think they are being serious, mature, or careful, when in truth they are being cruel to themselves in a tone they would never use on someone they love. This is why awareness matters so much. The first softening begins when you notice the tone of your own mind. Not just the content of the thoughts, but the energy behind them. Is the mind guiding you, or is it cornering you? Is it helping you see clearly, or is it throwing accusation after accusation without mercy? Once you notice this, something changes. You are no longer fully inside the attack. You are observing it, and that small distance is where freedom begins. Marcus Aurelius, like awareness, is not cold detachment. It is steady presence. It is the ability to say, "This thought is passing through me, but it is not the whole of me. This fear is here, but it does not get to rule the night. This memory hurts, but I do not need to stab myself with it again to prove it mattered." That kind of awareness interrupts the violence without creating a second war. Many people respond to overthinking by becoming angry at themselves for overthinking, but this only adds another layer of force. Now the mind is not only restless, it is ashamed of being restless. Stoic awareness takes a different path. It does not panic over mental noise. It notices it, names it, and refuses to feed it. It does not say, "I must stop thinking right now." It says, "I see what the mind is doing, and I do not have to follow it any further." This is where gentleness becomes strength. To soften mental aggression before rest, you have to stop treating every painful thought like an emergency. Some thoughts are only habits, some fears are echoes, some worries are the mind repeating old patterns because it does not yet know how to be still. When you see this clearly, the night becomes less threatening. You stop expecting the mind to be perfect. You simply stop letting it strike you unchecked. Then another truth becomes clear. The goal is not to create a perfectly empty mind before sleep. The goal is to create a safer relationship with your own thoughts. A place inside where not every mistake becomes a sentence, not every fear becomes a prophecy, and not every memory becomes a weapon. This kind of inner safety changes the body too. The chest loosens, the jaw relaxes, the breath stops bracing for battle. You begin to feel that rest is possible, not because the mind has become silent all at once, but because it has become less brutal. And that matters more than most people realize, because a mind that stops attacking itself at night slowly becomes a mind that can trust itself again in the morning. And as the mind slowly learns to stop turning against itself, another quiet confusion begins to reveal itself. You may notice that even on the days when your body feels completely drained, sleep still does not come easily. The eyes are heavy, the limbs are tired, yet something inside remains unsettled, because being exhausted is not the same as being at peace. There is a kind of tiredness that comes from effort, work, movement, responsibility, long hours. This kind of fatigue is natural. The body asks for rest, and when the mind is calm, sleep follows like a gentle tide. But there is another kind of tiredness that feels heavier, deeper, almost harder to escape. It comes not from what you did, but from what you carried. Many people reach the end of the day thinking they should fall asleep instantly because they are worn out. But instead, they lie awake, staring into the quiet, wondering why rest feels so far away. This is where the misunderstanding begins. The body may be ready to sleep, but the mind is still holding tension. Exhaustion is physical, peace is internal. The body can be pushed to its limits, but if the mind is still gripping worries, replaying moments, or bracing for what might happen next, it does not release. It stays alert, even in stillness. It keeps scanning, questioning, preparing, and so, instead of resting, you remain in a state of quiet unrest. This is why some of the most tired people struggle the most at night. They have spent the entire day giving energy outward, solving problems, meeting expectations, reacting to situations, staying productive. But they have not given themselves a moment to settle inward. So when the day ends, everything they postponed begins to surface at once. The mind, which was too busy to feel earlier, now demands attention. Stoicism teaches that rest is not something you earn only through effort. It is something you allow through clarity. Marcus Aurelius understood that the mind must be guided into stillness, not forced into it. You cannot command yourself to be peaceful just because you are tired. Peace comes when the inner resistance begins to loosen. When you stop holding on to things that no longer need your grip. When you recognize that not every problem requires your attention in this moment. This is where many people get trapped. They believe that if they are not thinking about something, they are being careless. That if they let go, something will go wrong. So even in exhaustion, they continue to think, to analyze, to prepare. But this constant mental effort does not create safety, it creates strain. True rest requires trust. Not blind trust in the world, but a quiet trust that you do not need to solve everything tonight. That tomorrow will come, and you will meet it with more strength if you allow yourself to recover now. That stepping away from your thoughts does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means respecting your limits. There is also a deeper layer to this. Sometimes the mind resists peace because it has become used to tension. It feels familiar. The body may crave rest, but the mind has learned to stay active, to stay alert, to stay in motion. So when stillness appears, it feels uncomfortable, almost unnatural. The mind begins to search for something to think about, something to worry about, something to hold on to. This is why exhaustion alone cannot bring peace. Peace is not the absence of energy. It is the absence of inner conflict. You can be full of energy and still feel calm, and you can be completely drained and still feel restless. The difference lies in how the mind relates to what is happening inside it. When the mind stops resisting, stops clinging, stops fighting itself, a different kind of rest begins to emerge. One that is not dependent on how tired you are, but on how willing you are to release. Stoic practice helps you see this clearly. It teaches you to separate what is happening from what you are adding to it. The event itself may be over, but the mind keeps extending it. The day has ended, but the mind keeps reliving it. The body is lying down, but the mind is still standing, still working, still carrying. So the practice becomes gentle, but powerful. You begin to notice when you are tired, and also when you are tense. You begin to see that one does not automatically cancel the other. And instead of waiting for exhaustion to force you into sleep, you start creating the conditions for peace to appear. You allow thoughts to pass without following them. You accept that not everything needs to be understood right now. You stop measuring your worth by how much you can endure without rest. And slowly, the mind begins to feel safer in stillness. This is where true rest begins. Not when the body collapses, but when the mind no longer feels the need to keep going. Not when you reach the limit of your energy, but when you release the pressure to keep holding everything together. And in that space, something rare begins to happen. You are no longer just tired, you are finally calm. And as calm begins to replace that restless exhaustion, another quiet struggle starts to reveal itself. Even when the body is ready to rest, even when the mind has softened a little, there is still something that pulls you back into tension. A subtle voice that says the day is not finished yet, that something is still open, still unresolved, still waiting for your attention, and because of that, you feel like you cannot fully let go. There is a pressure many people carry without noticing. The pressure to end every day clean, every task completed, every conversation settled, every emotion understood. It sounds responsible, even admirable. But beneath it, there is a hidden cost. Because life does not move in perfect circles. It moves in fragments, in half-finished moments, in conversations that stop too soon, in efforts that do not reach the result you hoped for. And when you expect everything to feel complete before you rest, you set yourself up for quiet disappointment every single night. The mind begins to measure the day like a scoreboard. What did you finish? What did you miss? What could have been better? What is still hanging over you? And even if you did 100 things right, the few things left undone begin to take over your attention. Not because they are more important, but because they are unresolved. This is where the feeling of failure quietly grows. Not from real failure, but from unfinishedness. You start to believe that leaving something open means you did not do enough. That going to bed without closure means you are falling behind. That rest must be earned only after everything is handled. But this belief slowly turns the end of the day into a place of pressure instead of release. Stoicism offers a different way to see this. Marcus Aurelius did not expect perfection from himself at the end of each day. He expected honesty. He would reflect, not to punish himself, but to understand. He knew that a human life is never fully complete in a single day. There will always be something left open, something still growing, something still uncertain. And that does not mean you failed. It means you are living. Letting the day be incomplete begins with accepting that completion is not the goal. Alignment is. Did you act with the best understanding you had? Did you try where it mattered? Did you stay within your values, even if the outcome was not perfect? These are the questions that bring clarity. Not whether everything was finished, but whether you showed up with intention. Because you can complete everything on your list and still feel empty. And you can leave many things unfinished and still feel at peace. The difference is not in the outcome, it is in how you relate to it. Many people chase emotional closure before bed. They want to feel that everything makes sense, that every interaction is resolved, that every feeling has been processed. But emotions do not always move on command. Some need time, some need distance, some need silence more than analysis. When you force closure, you create tension. You replay conversations, trying to fix what already happened. You search for the perfect explanation, the perfect understanding, the perfect emotional state. But the more you push, the more the mind resists, because not everything is meant to be resolved in one sitting. Stoic wisdom teaches patience with the unfinished. It reminds you that life unfolds over time, not in one night of thinking. That clarity often comes when you stop chasing it so aggressively, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is leave something where it is, and return to it with a clearer mind tomorrow. There is also a quiet freedom in this. When you stop demanding that the day be complete, you remove the pressure to be perfect. You allow yourself to be human, to have limits, to pause without guilt, to rest without feeling like you are abandoning something important. And what you begin to notice is that the world does not fall apart when you let go. The task will still be there tomorrow. The conversation can continue later. The problem can be approached with fresh eyes. In fact, many things become easier when you stop forcing them into closure at the wrong time. Your mind begins to trust this process. It no longer feels the need to rush, to fix, to control every loose end before sleep. It starts to understand that rest is not the enemy of progress. It is part of it. That stepping away is not failure. It is preparation. This is how the emotional weight begins to lift even further, not because everything is solved, but because you are no longer demanding that it be. You allow the day to end as it is, not perfect, not complete, but finished enough. And in that acceptance, something shifts inside you. The mind softens, the pressure fades, the need to keep going dissolves. And for the first time, you lie down without feeling like you left something behind. Because you didn't, you simply chose to return to yourself. And once you stop demanding that every part of the day be perfectly tied together, something deeper begins to open. A quiet space you may not have noticed before, not outside you, but within. Because beyond the noise of unfinished tasks and unresolved thoughts, there is still a place inside you that has not been disturbed, a place you rarely visit, because you were never taught how to return to it. There is a strange distance many people feel from themselves. They move through the day reacting, responding, adjusting to everything around them. Conversations pull them one way, responsibilities pull them another. Emotions rise and fall depending on what happens. And slowly, without realizing it, they drift away from their own center. By the time night comes, they are exhausted, not only from what they did, but from how far they have wandered from themselves. This is where the ancient art of returning inward begins. Marcus Aurelius lived in constant pressure. He carried responsibility, conflict, uncertainty. Yet he often reminded himself of something simple but powerful, that no matter what was happening around him, he could step back inside himself. Not to escape reality, but to reconnect with clarity, to remember who he was beneath the roles, beneath the noise, beneath the constant demands. This inner return is not something dramatic. It is quiet, almost unnoticed at first. It begins when you stop looking outward for a moment, when you stop replaying conversations, when you stop anticipating what comes next, and instead, you gently turn your attention inward, not to judge yourself, not to fix anything immediately, but simply to be present with what is already there. Most people are uncomfortable with this at first, because when you return inward, you meet everything you have been avoiding, the tension, the thoughts, the emotions that were pushed aside during the day. But here is the difference. When you meet them without resistance, without rushing to change them, they begin to lose their sharpness. You are no longer being pulled by them. You are observing them. And that changes everything. The mind starts to settle, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer scattered. You are no longer divided between past and future, between what happened and what might happen. You are here, fully, quietly, and in that presence, something begins to reorganize itself. Returning to yourself is not about finding new answers. It is about remembering what was already stable within you. There is a part of you that does not panic when things go wrong. A part that can see clearly even when emotions are strong. A part that is not shaken by every thought that passes through. But when you spend the entire day reacting, that part gets buried under layers of noise. The Stoics trained themselves to return to that place again and again. Not once, not occasionally, but as a habit. At night, this becomes especially powerful, because instead of carrying the entire world into your sleep, you begin to step back into yourself. You stop identifying with every worry, every unfinished detail, every fear. You remember that you are not just the events of your day. You are not just the thoughts passing through your mind. You are the one observing them. And from that position, everything feels lighter. There is also a sense of safety that comes with this. When you are lost in the outside world, your peace depends on what happens, on how people behave, on how situations unfold. But when you return inward, you begin to realize that your stability does not have to come from external conditions. It can come from within, not as an idea, but as a felt experience. The more you practice this, the easier it becomes. You do not need to force it. You do not need to create silence instantly. You simply notice when you have drifted too far outward, and you gently come back to your breath, back to your awareness, back to the part of you that is steady even when everything else is moving. This is what turns the night into a reset, not because all problems disappear, but because you are no longer entangled in them. You create distance, not by avoiding life, but by grounding yourself within it. And in that grounded state, the mind naturally begins to slow down. The need to control fades. The urge to overthink weakens. The pressure to figure everything out softens. And what remains is a quiet clarity. A sense that you are enough as you are in this moment, that you do not need to solve your entire life before you can rest. That returning to yourself is not something you earn after everything is done. It is something you can choose at any time, even now. And as you settle into that awareness, something inside you begins to reset without effort. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped moving away from yourself. And in that stillness, you remember what it feels like to be home. And as you begin to return to yourself more often, something else becomes impossible to ignore. The moment the room goes quiet, the moment the distractions fall away, the moment there is nothing left to focus on outside, the mind suddenly grows louder. Not softer, not calmer, louder. It feels almost unfair. All day you were busy, moving, thinking, reacting, doing what needed to be done. And now, when the body finally gets the chance to rest, the mind refuses to follow. Thoughts rise quickly. Old memories return without warning. Questions you ignored earlier now demand answers. It can feel like the silence is not peaceful, but overwhelming. There is a reason for this. The noise was always there. The difference is that during the day you were not able to hear it. Activity acts like a shield. Conversations, tasks, notifications, responsibilities, they all keep your attention outward. They give the mind something to hold on to. But when that external structure disappears, the mind turns inward by default. And whatever has been left unattended begins to surface. This is why silence can feel uncomfortable. Not because silence is the problem, but because it reveals what has been hidden beneath constant movement. Unresolved emotions, unprocessed experiences, lingering fears. These do not disappear just because you stayed busy. They wait, quietly, patiently, and when the space opens, they rise to the surface, not to attack you, but to be seen. But most people misunderstand this moment. They think something is wrong. They think, why can't I just relax? Why is my mind doing this now? And instead of staying present, they react. They try to escape the silence. They reach for distractions. They turn on noise. They scroll. They think harder. They try to shut the mind down. And in doing so, they miss the opportunity that silence offers. Marcus Aurelius did not fear silence. He used it. He understood that when the mind becomes loud, it is not a sign of weakness. It is a signal that something within you needs attention, not suppression. Instead of running from these moments, he leaned into them with reflection. Not harsh judgment, not panic, but calm observation. This is where Stoic reflection transforms the experience. Instead of reacting to every thought, you begin to watch it. A worry appears. Instead of chasing it, you notice it. A memory rises. Instead of resisting it, you allow it to pass through. A fear speaks. Instead of believing it instantly, you question its weight. You begin to separate yourself from the noise, and slowly the volume starts to change. Not because the thoughts disappear immediately, but because you are no longer feeding them with urgency. The mind learns that it does not need to shout to be heard. It learns that it can settle when it is not being pushed away or pulled into. Silence, then, stops feeling like an enemy. It becomes a mirror, a place where you can see what is actually happening inside you without distortion, without distraction, without the pressure to perform or respond. And while this can feel intense at first, it is also where real clarity begins. Because when you stop running, you start understanding. You see patterns in your thinking. You notice what keeps repeating. You begin to understand what truly affects you and what only appears important in the moment. And this understanding softens the chaos. It gives structure to what once felt overwhelming. There is also a kind of honesty that only silence can bring. During the day, it is easy to avoid certain truths, to stay on the surface, to keep things moving. But at night, in the quiet, there is no one to impress, no role to play. It is just you, and what is real. This can feel uncomfortable, but it is also where healing begins. Not by forcing solutions, but by allowing awareness. You do not need to fix everything the moment it appears. You only need to stop avoiding it, to let the mind express what it has been holding without turning it into a crisis, to listen without reacting, to observe without attaching. And in that space, something begins to shift. The silence that once felt heavy starts to feel spacious. The thoughts that once felt overwhelming begin to lose their intensity. The mind, which once rushed to fill every quiet moment, begins to slow down on its own. This is not because you controlled it. It is because you stopped fighting it. And this is the quiet power of Stoic reflection. It turns silence from a place of discomfort into a place of restoration. It teaches you that the noise inside you is not something to fear, but something to understand. And once it is understood, it no longer needs to be so loud. So the next time the room gets quiet and your mind begins to speak louder than you expected, do not rush to escape it. Stay. Listen, not with fear, but with calm attention, because within that noise there is something waiting to settle. And if you allow it, the silence you once avoided may become the very place where your mind finally begins to heal. And as silence begins to feel less like a threat and more like a space you can stay in, another habit quietly reveals itself. Even when the room is calm, even when the mind is no longer shouting the way it used to, there is still a loop that keeps pulling you back. A moment from earlier, a word you wish you didn't say, a decision that didn't go the way you hoped. And before you realize it, you are replaying it again. There is a kind of prison the mind builds at night, not with walls, but with repetition. The same scene runs again and again, each time with a sharper edge. You notice every detail you missed. You imagine better responses. You rewrite the outcome as if doing so could change what already happened. And the more you replay it, the heavier it becomes. This is how self-judgment quietly takes control. It does not come as a loud voice at first. It feels reasonable. It says, I am just trying to understand. I am learning from this. I want to do better next time. And on the surface, that sounds wise. But underneath, something else is happening. The tone shifts. It becomes harsher, less patient, less forgiving. You should have known better. You always do this. Why can't you get it right? And just like that, reflection turns into punishment. The mind stops trying to learn and starts trying to condemn. This is where many people get stuck without realizing it. They believe that being hard on themselves will make them better, that if they replay the mistake enough times, they will never repeat it. But the opposite often happens. The more they punish themselves, the more tension they create, the more fear they build around failure, and the less clearly they are able to see what actually needs to change. Because clarity does not grow in an environment of attack. It grows in an environment of honesty without cruelty. Marcus Aurelius practiced self-reflection every night, but not in the way most people do today. He did not sit there tearing himself apart. He observed his actions like a calm teacher, not a harsh judge. He asked himself what he could improve, but he did not confuse that with destroying his own sense of worth. This is the difference between self-correction and self-punishment. Self-correction is quiet. It looks at what happened and says, "This could have been done better. I will remember that." Then it lets the moment go. It does not need to hold on to it any longer than necessary. Self-punishment, on the other hand, refuses to let go. It keeps the mistake alive. It adds emotion to it. Shame, frustration, regret. It builds a story around it. And slowly, that one moment becomes part of how you see yourself. That is where the real damage happens. Not in the mistake itself, but in how long you keep reliving it. At night, when the world is quiet, this habit becomes stronger. There are no distractions to interrupt the loop, no one to speak to, no task to shift your attention. It is just you, and the version of yourself you keep replaying. But here is the truth that breaks the cycle. Replaying a mistake does not change it. It only deepens your attachment to it. You cannot think your way back into the past and correct it. You can only carry the lesson forward, and that requires a different kind of strength. The strength to look at what happened once, clearly, honestly, and then release it. This is not ignoring responsibility. It is respecting reality. You did what you knew at that moment. You acted with the awareness you had at that time. And now you have seen something new. That is growth. But growth does not require suffering to prove that it matters. It requires attention, then movement. The Stoic approach is simple but powerful. You acknowledge the mistake without exaggerating it. You take the lesson without turning it into a wound. And then you allow the mind to move on. At first, this feels unnatural, because the mind is used to holding on. It believes that letting go means you are not taking things seriously, but over time, you begin to see that holding on too long is what distorts your thinking. It turns a clear lesson into a heavy burden. When you stop replaying every mistake, something begins to shift. The mind feels lighter. The tension around past actions softens. You begin to trust yourself again, not because you are perfect, but because you know you can learn without attacking yourself in the process. And that trust changes how you enter sleep. Instead of lying down with a list of everything you did wrong, you lie down with a simple awareness. You are still learning, still growing, still adjusting, and that is enough. The past is no longer something you need to relive. It becomes something you have already walked through. And for the first time in a long time, the night is no longer filled with echoes of what you wish you could change, but with a quiet understanding that you do not need to keep punishing yourself to become better. You only need to be willing to see and then let go. And as the mind begins to release its grip on past mistakes, another weight slowly rises into view, not from what you did to yourself, but from what others did to you. Words that cut deeper than expected, actions that felt unfair, moments that left something unsettled inside you, and even after everything else quiets down, this remains. Bitterness is one of the heaviest things a person can carry into the night. It does not always show itself clearly. Sometimes it hides behind thoughts of justice, of what should have happened, of what you wish you had said. The mind begins to build scenes, not to understand, but to win, to correct the past, to regain control. And slowly the night becomes filled with silent arguments, imagined confrontations, and quiet anger that refuses to settle. It feels justified. It feels like holding on to it means you are protecting yourself. But what it is really doing is keeping you awake, because the mind cannot rest while it is still fighting. Resentment keeps the body in a state of tension. The chest tightens, the breath becomes shallow, the thoughts sharpen. Even in stillness, there is movement inside, a kind of emotional heat that does not cool on its own, and the longer it stays, the more it begins to shape how you feel about everything else. This is what makes bitterness so dangerous. It does not stay contained. It spreads. It turns one moment into a lasting mood, one person into a general distrust, one hurt into a constant readiness for conflict. And when you carry that into sleep, it does not disappear overnight. It follows you into the next day, affecting how you see, how you react, how you move through the world. The Stoics saw this clearly. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that people act from their own understanding, their own limitations, their own confusion, not to excuse harm, but to understand its source. Because when you understand that others act based on what they know, not always out of deliberate malice, something begins to loosen. You stop taking everything as a personal attack, and when you stop taking it personally, the emotional grip begins to weaken. Ending the day without bitterness does not mean pretending nothing happened. It means refusing to let what happened control your inner state any longer. There is a difference between acknowledging pain and holding on to it. You can recognize that something hurt, that it was unfair, that it affected you. But you do not have to keep reliving it. You do not have to carry it into every quiet moment. You do not have to let it shape your peace. This is where discipline comes in, not the kind that forces you to suppress your feelings, but the kind that guides you away from feeding them unnecessarily. When the mind starts to replay the situation, you notice it. When it begins to build arguments, you see it, and instead of following it, you gently step back. You remind yourself of something simple. This moment is over. The person is not here. The event is not happening again. What remains is only your attachment to it, and that attachment is something you can loosen. Many people hold on to resentment because they believe letting go means losing. They believe that if they stop thinking about it, they are accepting it, that if they release the anger, they are allowing the other person to get away with it. But this is a misunderstanding. Letting go is not about them, it is about you. It is about deciding that your peace is more valuable than replaying a moment that cannot be changed, that your rest matters more than proving a point in your mind, that carrying emotional poison only harms the one holding it. This is not weakness, it is control. Real control is not about dominating others. It is about not being dominated by your own reactions. It is about choosing what stays in your mind and what does not. It is about ending the day with a sense of clarity instead of carrying unresolved anger into the night. There is also a quiet strength in acceptance, not approval, but acceptance of reality as it is. The moment happened, it cannot be undone. The only question now is what you will do with it. Will you carry it forward, letting it shape your mood, your sleep, your next day? Or will you set it down, allowing yourself to rest without its weight? When you choose to release bitterness, something shifts. The mind begins to cool, the body relaxes. The need to argue, to prove, to correct, fades. You are no longer in that moment. You are here. And here, you have a choice. To rest without carrying anger. To sleep without holding on to what no longer serves you. To wake up without yesterday's poison still moving through you. This is the discipline. Not to never feel anger, but to know when to stop feeding it. Not to deny what hurt, but to refuse to let it define your inner world. And as you lie down, with the weight of resentment slowly lifting, you begin to feel something that may have been missing for a long time. Lightness. A quiet space where nothing is being fought, nothing is being held too tightly, nothing is demanding your energy. And in that space, rest finally begins to feel possible again, and as bitterness begins to loosen its grip, another pattern quietly steps forward, one that feels different but carries a similar weight. The moment you lie down, the mind does not just replay the day. It starts judging it, judging you. The night turns into something unexpected, a courtroom. There is a strange shift that happens when the lights go out. You are no longer just remembering what happened, you are evaluating it. Every word, every action, every missed opportunity is brought forward like evidence. And without even noticing, you take on two roles at once, the one on trial and the one delivering the verdict. You question yourself in ways you would never question anyone else. Why did you say that? Why didn't you do more? Why are you like this? And the answers never feel enough. Because this is not a fair trial. The mind does not gather balanced evidence. It focuses on what went wrong, what was awkward, what could have been better. It ignores the effort, the context, the moments you handled well. It builds a case, not to understand, but to accuse. This is how the courtroom becomes a place of quiet punishment. The more you review, the harsher the judgment becomes. Small mistakes are treated like major failures. Uncertain moments are interpreted as weakness. And before long, you are not just reflecting on the day, you are questioning your worth within it. This habit forms slowly. It comes from a desire to improve, to be better, to avoid repeating mistakes. But somewhere along the way, that desire turns into pressure. The mind begins to believe that constant criticism is the way forward, that if it pushes hard enough, you will become who you are supposed to be. But pressure is not the same as progress. When the mind becomes a judge instead of a guide, it loses its ability to see clearly. It stops looking for truth and starts looking for flaws. It no longer asks, "What can I learn?" It asks, "What is wrong with me?" And that question has no peaceful answer. This is why many people leave the day more tired mentally than physically, not because of what they did, but because of how they judged it afterward. Marcus Aurelius practiced nightly reflection, but not like a prosecutor building a case. He approached himself with discipline, but also with fairness. He understood that you cannot improve what you only attack. You have to see it accurately first. Stoic evaluation is different. It does not rush to label everything as good or bad. It observes. It separates what is within your control from what is not. It looks at actions without turning them into identity. It says, this action could be improved, instead of, you are a failure. That difference is everything. Because when you stop turning your actions into your identity, you create space to grow. You stop carrying every mistake as a reflection of who you are. You begin to see yourself as someone in progress, not someone on trial. This changes the entire tone of the night. The mind no longer needs to build a case. It becomes quieter, more honest, less dramatic. Instead of stacking accusations, it begins to ask simple questions. What did I do well today? Where could I improve? What is within my control to adjust tomorrow? And once those questions are answered, the process ends. There is no need to continue. There is no need to replay it again. There is no need to punish yourself for not being perfect, because the goal was never perfection. It was awareness. Most people keep the trial going because they believe stopping means they are letting themselves off too easily. But this is another misunderstanding. You are not avoiding responsibility by ending the evaluation. You are respecting its purpose. Reflection is meant to guide, not to trap. Once it has done its job, holding on to it only creates unnecessary suffering. This is where Stoic calm replaces inner accusation. You begin to trust that one honest look at the day is enough, that you do not need to cross-examine every detail to improve. That growth comes from clarity, not from pressure. And slowly the courtroom dissolves. The voices quiet down. The need to judge fades. You are no longer sitting there, defending yourself against your own thoughts. You are simply present, with a clear understanding of the day, without the weight of constant evaluation pressing on you. And in that space, something shifts. You are no longer someone on trial. You are someone learning, someone adjusting, someone allowed to rest. Because at the end of the day, you were never meant to prove your worth before sleep. You were only meant to understand your path, and then let it go. And as the courtroom fades and the judgment softens, another pattern quietly steps into the space. One that feels less like criticism and more like unfinished noise. Not from what you did, but from what you wish you had said. The mind begins to rehearse. A conversation from earlier returns, but this time it changes. You respond differently. You say the perfect thing. You defend yourself more clearly. You imagine their reaction, their silence, their regret. And for a moment, it feels like you are taking control of something that slipped away. But the moment ends, and the mind starts again. Another version, another response, another imagined outcome. This is how peace gets stolen in silence, not by loud thoughts, but by conversations that never actually happened. There is something deeply human about wanting to be understood, to explain yourself better, to correct what felt off, to speak the truth more clearly than you did in the moment. But when the day ends, these desires often turn into mental loops. The mind keeps returning to the same interaction, trying to reshape it, trying to fix it after it has already passed. And the more you chase it, the further rest moves away. Because these conversations have no ending. They are built in the imagination, not in reality. There is no final response, no true resolution. Just an endless cycle of what could have been said, what should have been said, what might still be said. And in that cycle, the mind stays active, alert, engaged, long after the moment itself has disappeared. This is why even a quiet room can feel so full. The body is still, but inside, the dialogue continues. Marcus Aurelius understood that not every thought deserves your attention, and more importantly, not every impulse to respond deserves to be followed. There is a difference between something needing to be said and the mind simply wanting to say it to feel complete. Most of the time, these imagined speeches are not about communication. They are about control. The mind wants to regain a sense of power over something that felt unresolved. It wants to rewrite the past in a way that feels more satisfying. But no matter how many times you replay it, the reality does not change. The conversation already happened. The silence that followed is real, and trying to fill that silence in your mind only keeps you tied to it. Letting silence remain silence is a discipline. It means accepting that not everything will be said, that not every misunderstanding will be corrected immediately, that sometimes the moment has passed, and the only thing left to do is release it. This does not mean you will never speak again. It means you choose when it is necessary, and when it is simply the mind trying to close a loop that does not need to be closed tonight. There is also a quiet discomfort that comes with this. When you stop chasing these conversations, you are left with the feeling they were trying to resolve, the tension, the uncertainty, the sense of not being fully understood, and instead of escaping it through imagined dialogue, you begin to sit with it. At first, this feels incomplete, but slowly, something changes. You begin to realize that the need to speak again was not always about clarity, it was about relief. And relief does not always come from more words. Sometimes it comes from allowing the moment to be exactly what it was, without adding anything more to it. Stoic awareness helps you see this clearly. When the mind starts building another version of the conversation, you notice it. You recognize the pattern, and instead of entering it, you step back. You let the thought appear, and then pass. You do not fight it. You do not follow it. You simply refuse to continue it. And in that refusal, the loop begins to weaken. The mind learns that it does not need to keep returning to the same place, that silence does not need to be filled to be safe, that not every loose end requires immediate attention. This is where peace begins to return. The inner dialogue slows down. The urge to rehearse fades. The need to correct, to explain, to defend, softens. You are no longer chasing something that is already behind you. You are here, in the quiet, and the quiet no longer feels like something missing. It feels complete, because you are no longer trying to force closure through imagined words. You are allowing the moment to rest, and in doing so, you give yourself permission to rest as well. Without one more argument, without one more speech, without one more attempt to control what has already passed. Just stillness, where nothing needs to be said anymore. And as the mind finally stops chasing conversations that no longer exist, another weight quietly rises, one that feels more personal, more sensitive, not something you wish you had said, but something you wish never happened at all. A moment that felt awkward, a look you didn't expect, a rejection that stayed longer than it should, and suddenly the entire night begins to orbit around it. There is a strange way the mind handles social pain. One small moment, one uncomfortable interaction, and it expands. It stretches beyond its size. It begins to color everything else that happened during the day. Good moments fade into the background, while that one scene becomes sharper, louder, more important than it really is. And before you realize it, the whole night feels heavy because of something that lasted only a few seconds. This is how the mind turns a moment into an identity. You are no longer someone who experienced embarrassment. You begin to feel like someone who is embarrassing. You are no longer someone who faced rejection. You begin to feel like someone who is not enough. And this shift happens quietly, without permission. Marcus Aurelius understood that events themselves are neutral, but the judgments we attach to them give them power. An awkward moment is just that, a moment. But when the mind repeats it, labels it, and builds a story around it, it becomes something much larger than it needs to be. The Stoic way is not to deny what happened. It is to refuse to exaggerate it. When embarrassment appears, the mind immediately tries to protect you. It replays the scene to learn from it. It tries to prevent it from happening again. But in doing so, it holds on to it longer than necessary. It keeps you inside that moment, even when it is already over. This is where awareness changes everything. You begin to notice how quickly the mind jumps from event to identity, from "that was awkward" to "I am awkward," from "that didn't go well" to "I always mess things up." And once you see that jump, you realize it is not truth. It is habit. A habit that can be softened. Embarrassment, rejection, social discomfort, these are part of being human. No one moves through life without them. The difference is not in who experiences them, but in how long they stay attached to them. Some people carry one moment for years. Others let it pass within minutes. The event is the same. The attachment is different. Stoicism teaches you to separate yourself from the moment without denying it. You can acknowledge, "that didn't go the way I hoped," but you do not need to build a story that follows you into the night. You do not need to replay it until it feels bigger than your entire day, because it isn't. There were many other moments, moments that went fine, moments that were neutral, moments that did not carry any emotional weight at all. But the mind ignores them because it is drawn to what feels intense. It believes intensity means importance. But intensity is not always truth. It is often just emotion passing through. When you understand this, you begin to loosen your grip on that one moment. You stop feeding it with attention. You stop treating it like something that needs to be analyzed again and again. You allow it to exist, without letting it define the entire atmosphere of your night. There is also a quiet kindness in this. You begin to treat yourself the way you would treat someone else. If a friend told you about an awkward moment, you would not define them by it. You would remind them that it happens, that it does not change who they are, that it will pass. But when it comes to yourself, you forget that same understanding. Stoic practice brings it back. It reminds you that you are not your worst moment of the day. You are not the reaction of someone else. You are not the outcome of one interaction. You are a person moving through experience, learning, adjusting, growing. And that perspective softens everything. The moment loses its sharpness. The emotional charge begins to fade. The mind stops circling around it. And slowly, the night opens up again. Not as a place where you relive what went wrong, but as a place where you release it. You lie down, not carrying that moment like a weight, but letting it sit where it belongs, in the past, where it can no longer shape your present. And for the first time, the night is not defined by one uncomfortable memory. It becomes wide again, quiet again, free from the need to prove, to correct, to relive. Just space, where you are allowed to rest, without being reduced to a single moment that has already passed. And as that one moment begins to loosen its hold on you, something even deeper starts to reveal itself. Because sometimes it is not just the moment that keeps you awake. It is what you believe that moment says about you. A quiet question begins to echo. What do they think of me now? Did I lose their respect? Did I say the wrong thing? And without realizing it, your peace begins to depend on answers you may never receive. There is a hidden hunger that follows many people into the night. Not for food, not for rest, but for approval. The need to be seen a certain way, to be understood, to be accepted without doubt. And when that feeling is uncertain, the mind begins to search for reassurance. It replays interactions, not just to understand them, but to measure how you were perceived. Did they like me? Did I sound confident? Did I look foolish? And the more the mind searches, the less peace it finds, because approval is something you cannot fully control. You can act well, you can speak clearly, you can show up with intention, but how others interpret you, how they feel about you, what they carry inside themselves, that is beyond your reach. And when your rest depends on something outside your control, it becomes fragile. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that the opinion of others is not the measure of a good life. People judge based on their own beliefs, their own experiences, their own limitations. One person may misunderstand you, another may overlook you, a third may admire you quietly without ever saying it. None of these define who you are. But when the mind seeks validation, it forgets this. It begins to build its sense of worth on shifting ground, and that is why it struggles to rest, because it is waiting for approval, waiting for confirmation, waiting for a signal that says, you are enough. But that signal rarely comes in a way that feels complete, and so the mind keeps searching. This is where Stoic clarity changes everything. You begin to withdraw your peace from public opinion, not by rejecting people, not by becoming distant or cold, but by understanding what belongs to you and what does not. Your actions belong to you. Your intentions belong to you. Your effort belongs to you, but their opinions do not. Once you see this clearly, something begins to shift. You stop chasing invisible approval. You stop measuring your worth by how others might have seen you in a moment that has already passed. You begin to rest in something more stable, your own awareness, your own integrity, your own quiet understanding of how you showed up. This does not mean you stop caring completely. It means you stop depending. There is a difference. Caring allows connection. Depending creates pressure. When you depend on approval, every interaction becomes a test. Every conversation becomes something to analyze. Every silence becomes something to interpret. And the mind never truly rests, because it is always waiting for feedback. But when you release that dependency, the night becomes lighter. You no longer need to replay the day to extract meaning from other people's reactions. You no longer need to guess what they think. You no longer need to hold on to moments just to feel secure. You begin to understand something simple but powerful. You were there. You lived the day. You acted as you could, and that is enough. There is also a quiet freedom in this. When your peace is no longer tied to approval, you stop performing in your own mind. You stop trying to rewrite yourself to fit imagined expectations. You allow yourself to exist without constant evaluation, and in that space, the need to impress fades. The need to prove fades. The need to be validated before you can rest disappears. This is where true rest begins to return, not because the world suddenly approves of you, but because you no longer require it to. You lie down without carrying the weight of how you were seen, without needing to fix your image, without needing to adjust your identity based on every reaction. Just you as you are. And that is enough for this moment. The mind softens, the tension releases, the quiet feels safe again. Because your peace is no longer waiting for permission from the outside, it has returned to where it always belonged, within you. And as the need for approval begins to loosen, another layer of truth quietly rises to the surface. Because even when the world is silent, even when no one is watching, even when you stop chasing what others think, there is still something that can disturb your rest, something that does not come from outside, something that lives within. There is a kind of discomfort that does not shout, but it does not leave either. It sits quietly in the background, a feeling that something is not fully right, not loud enough to panic you, but present enough to keep you from settling completely. And no amount of silence, no comfortable position, no distraction can fully cover it. This is the disturbance that comes from within your own actions, not from what others did, but from what you know. Guilt has a different weight. It does not need noise to stay alive. It does not need repetition to return. It simply waits. And when the night comes, it surfaces in a way that is difficult to ignore. A word that was not honest, a choice that did not align with what you know is right, a moment where you went against your own values, even in a small way, and the mind begins to feel restless, not because it is confused, but because it is clear. This is why inner rest requires something deeper than quiet. It requires alignment. Stoicism teaches that peace does not begin with controlling thoughts, but with living in a way that does not create unnecessary inner conflict. When your actions match your values, the mind settles more easily. There is less to defend, less to hide, less to revisit. But when there is misalignment, the mind cannot fully relax. Because part of you knows. You may try to move past it quickly during the day. You may justify it, minimize it, tell yourself it was not a big deal. But the night has a way of bringing honesty back into the room. And in that quiet, what was pushed aside begins to return, not to punish you, but to remind you. This is what makes guilt feel so persistent. It is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to bring you back into alignment. Many people try to silence this feeling by distraction or denial. They tell themselves to stop thinking about it, to let it go. But without understanding what caused it, the feeling does not disappear. It stays because the action that created it has not been acknowledged. Stoicism approaches this differently. It does not avoid the discomfort. It faces it calmly. You look at the action clearly, without exaggeration, without self-attack. You recognize where you stepped out of alignment, not to shame yourself, but to understand what needs to be corrected. This kind of honesty is not harsh. It is grounding. Because once you see it clearly, you no longer need to carry confusion. You know what happened. You know what could have been done differently. And most importantly, you know what you will do moving forward. This is where guilt begins to soften, not because you ignored it, but because you listened to it properly. There is also an important distinction here. Moral cleanliness is not perfection. It is awareness and correction. You will make mistakes. You will fall short at times. That is part of being human. But what disturbs rest is not the mistake itself. It is the refusal to face it honestly. The longer you avoid it, the heavier it becomes. The more you carry it, the more it shapes your inner state. But when you meet it with clarity, something changes. The mind no longer needs to keep bringing it up. It no longer needs to repeat the feeling, because the message has been received. And once the message is received, it can settle. There is a quiet strength in this process. You are no longer running from your own actions. You are not hiding from yourself. You are facing what is real and adjusting, and that creates a different kind of peace. A peace that is not dependent on silence or comfort or perfect conditions. A peace that comes from knowing you are aligned with yourself. This is why some people can sleep deeply even after difficult days. Not because everything went perfectly, but because they know they acted with honesty. They did not betray their own values. They did not carry hidden conflict into the night, and that makes the mind feel safe. When you are aligned, there is nothing inside you that needs to keep pulling at your attention, nothing that needs to be hidden, nothing that needs to be justified over and over again. You are clear, and clarity allows rest. So as you lie down, you begin to understand something simple but powerful. Peace is not created only by calming the mind. It is protected by how you live. And when your actions, your words, and your values begin to move in the same direction, the night becomes lighter. Not because you forced it to be, but because there is nothing left inside you that needs to resist it. And as the mind begins to clear from what you carry within, another tension quietly reveals itself. Not from the past, not from your actions, but from everything you are still trying to control. Even in the stillness of night, the grip remains. There is a subtle effort that does not stop when the day ends. The mind keeps reaching forward, trying to shape what has not yet happened, trying to secure outcomes that are still uncertain, trying to predict, prepare, and protect all at once. And while the body lies still, the mind stays active, holding tightly to things that are not yet real. This is where rest begins to break. Because the mind cannot sleep while it is still negotiating with the future. It runs through possibilities. What if this goes wrong? What if that doesn't work out? What will you say? What will happen next? It builds scenarios, trying to feel ready, trying to reduce uncertainty. But instead of creating peace, it creates more movement, more tension, more wakefulness. And slowly, insomnia begins to grow. Not from noise, but from control. The belief underneath this is simple. If I think about it enough, I can manage it. If I prepare enough, I can prevent it. If I hold on to it, I can secure the outcome. But this belief comes at a cost, because most of what you are trying to control is not yours to control. Marcus Aurelius returned to this truth again and again. He reminded himself that there are things within his power and things outside of it. His thoughts, his actions, his responses, these belonged to him. But outcomes, opinions, events, the behavior of others, these did not. And when the mind confuses these two, it begins to suffer. At night, this confusion becomes clearer. You try to solve tomorrow before it arrives. You try to secure results that depend on variables you cannot command. You try to feel certainty in a world that does not offer it. And the more you try, the more restless you become, because control is being applied in the wrong place. The Stoic shift is not about giving up. It is about redirecting. Instead of holding on to outcomes, you return to what is actually yours, your effort, your intention, your preparation during the day. And once the day ends, your responsibility ends with it. The rest is not yours to carry into the night. This is where surrender begins to take shape. Not as weakness, but as clarity. You are not responsible for how everything unfolds. You are responsible for how you show up when it does, and that realization changes the entire energy of the night. The mind no longer needs to grip so tightly. It begins to loosen. The future is still there, but it is no longer something you are trying to control in this moment. It becomes something you will meet, not something you must solve right now. This creates space. Space for the breath to slow. Space for the body to relax. Space for the mind to step back from constant anticipation. Surrender in this sense is not passive. It is active release. You notice when the mind starts reaching forward, trying to manage what has not happened yet, and instead of following it, you gently bring it back. Back to what is present. Back to what is real. Back to what is within your reach. And what you begin to see is that very little actually requires your attention in this moment. The rest can wait. There is also a quiet trust that grows here. Not a blind trust that everything will go perfectly, but a grounded trust that you will handle whatever comes with the clarity you regain through rest. That you do not need to be awake all night to be prepared. That you do not need to think through every possibility to be capable. In fact, the more you rest, the better you respond. This is the part many people miss. They believe that holding on to the future gives them strength. But it only drains the strength they already have. It takes energy from tomorrow and uses it in a moment where it has no effect. And so the practice becomes simple. At the end of the day, you pause. You notice what the mind is still holding. And you ask a clear question. Is this within my control right now? If the answer is no, you let it go. Not forever, not carelessly. Just for this moment. Just for this night. And in that letting go, something begins to shift. The mind feels lighter. The constant forward pull softens. The need to predict and prepare fades into the background. You are no longer living in tomorrow. You are here, and here. There is nothing you need to control. Only space to rest. Only space to recover. Only space to allow the mind to reset itself naturally. And as that space expands, the body follows. The tension releases, the breath deepens. The quiet becomes comfortable, because you are no longer trying to carry what was never yours to hold. And in that release, sleep no longer feels like something you have to force. It becomes something that finally finds you. And as the grip on tomorrow begins to loosen, another habit quietly steps forward. One that feels almost automatic. The moment your head touches the pillow, the mind moves ahead. Not gently, but quickly. It begins to step into the next day before this one has even fully ended. Plans start forming. Conversations are rehearsed. Problems are anticipated. And before you realize it, you are no longer in the night. You are already living tomorrow. There is a subtle anxiety behind this movement, a need to be ready, to stay ahead, to make sure nothing catches you off guard. It feels responsible. It feels like preparation. But underneath, it carries tension. Because instead of allowing the day to close, the mind opens another one. And in doing so, it never truly rests. This is why many people lie down physically, but remain active mentally. The body is still, but the mind has already moved forward. It is scheduling, predicting, organizing, imagining outcomes. And the more it does this, the further it drifts from the present moment. Because the present moment is quiet, but tomorrow is full. Full of uncertainty, full of possibilities, full of things that feel like they need to be controlled. And so the mind prefers to go there because it feels like something is happening. But what is happening is not rest. It is extension. You are extending your day into the night and pulling tomorrow into a moment where it does not belong. Marcus Aurelius understood the importance of boundaries within the mind, not just between what you control and what you do not, but between when things should be held and when they should be released. The night was not a place for planning the next battle. It was a place for recovery, because without recovery, there is no clarity. When you mentally enter tomorrow too early, you begin to drain energy from a day that has not even started. You use up focus, attention, and emotional strength on imagined situations. And when tomorrow actually arrives, you feel heavier, less clear, less present. This is how anxiety quietly builds, not always from what is happening, but from living ahead of yourself. The Stoic practice here is simple, but requires awareness. You notice when the mind begins to move forward, when it starts to build the next day, and instead of following it, you gently bring it back, not with force, but with recognition. Tomorrow is not here yet. There is nothing to do about it right now. That thought alone begins to slow things down, because most of what the mind is trying to solve does not require action in this moment. It requires presence. It requires rest. It requires space for clarity to return on its own. There is also a deeper truth here. The need to enter tomorrow early often comes from a lack of trust. A belief that if you do not prepare enough, something will go wrong. That if you do not think it through now, you will not be ready later. But this belief ignores something important. You have handled every day before this one. Not perfectly, but sufficiently. You responded, you adjusted, you figured things out as they came. And you will do the same tomorrow, but only if you arrive with a rested mind. Preparation has its place, but not at the cost of peace. When the night becomes another planning session, the mind never learns how to settle. It stays in a state of low-level alertness, always scanning, always thinking ahead. And over time, this becomes a habit. The body lies down, but the mind does not recognize the signal to stop. Returning to the present breaks this pattern. You begin to anchor yourself in what is actually here, the feeling of your breath, the stillness of the room, the absence of immediate demand. You remind yourself that there is nothing required of you right now, no decisions to make, no problems to solve, no outcomes to control, just this moment. And in this moment, there is space. At first, the mind may resist this. It may try to pull you forward again, but each time you notice it and gently return, the habit begins to weaken. The mind learns that it does not need to live ahead to be safe, that it can remain here, and nothing falls apart. This is where rest begins to deepen. Not because the future disappears, but because it is no longer invading the present. It stays where it belongs, and you stay where you are. The night becomes whole again, not divided between now and what comes next, not stretched between today and tomorrow, just complete in itself. And as you lie there, no longer reaching forward, something inside you begins to settle in a way that feels natural. Effort fades, tension softens, the need to prepare disappears, and for the first time, you are not living 2 days at once. You are simply here, and here is enough for rest to begin. And as you begin to stay present, without drifting into tomorrow, another quiet burden begins to reveal itself, one that does not belong to your past or your future, but to the people around you. Because even when your own thoughts begin to settle, something else remains. The weight of everyone else. There is a kind of tiredness that does not come from what you did, but from what you absorbed. Conversations that stayed with you longer than they should. Someone else's frustration that quietly became your tension. Disappointment that was not yours, but now feels like it is sitting inside your chest. And by the time night comes, you are not only carrying your day, you are carrying theirs too. This is how emotional weight builds without being noticed. It does not arrive all at once. It collects. A tone of voice here, a reaction there, a problem someone shared that you could not solve, but still felt responsible for. And because you care, because you listen, because you want to understand, you let it in. But what you let in does not always leave on its own. So when the room grows quiet, when the distractions fall away, all of it remains. Their stress, their mood, their confusion, their expectations, and your mind begins to process it as if it belongs to you. This is where boundaries begin to blur. You start thinking about their problems as if they are yours to fix. You carry their emotional tone into your own night. You feel unsettled without fully knowing why, because the source is not entirely within you, but it is now resting inside you. Marcus Aurelius faced people of all kinds, angry, impatient, difficult, unpredictable. But he reminded himself of something simple. Other people's actions come from their own nature, their own understanding. And while you may interact with them, you do not have to become them. This is the foundation of emotional boundaries. You can care without carrying. You can listen without absorbing. You can be present without losing yourself. But most people were never taught this. They believe that caring means taking on everything, that being a good person means feeling what others feel, solving what others struggle with, holding what others cannot. And over time, this turns into quiet exhaustion, because the mind cannot rest while it is holding multiple emotional worlds at once. At night, this becomes clearer. You lie down, and thoughts appear that are not fully yours. Someone else's situation, someone else's reaction, someone else's mood, and your mind begins to move through it, trying to make sense of it, trying to ease it, trying to resolve it. But here is the truth. Not everything you feel belongs to you, and not everything you understand needs to be carried. Stoic awareness helps you separate this. When a thought arises about someone else's situation, you notice it. You acknowledge that it matters, but you also recognize its place. It belongs to them, their life, their choices, their path. You can support them during the day, but at night, you must return to yourself. This is not selfish. It is necessary. Because if you do not create that boundary, your mind never fully comes back to its own center. It stays stretched across multiple concerns, multiple emotions, multiple people. And in that stretched state, rest becomes difficult. The body may be still, but the mind is divided. Creating emotional boundaries before bed is a quiet practice. You do not need to push people away. You do not need to stop caring. You simply recognize what is yours and what is not. You gently release what you picked up throughout the day, not with resistance, but with clarity. This is theirs. This is not mine to carry right now. And as you repeat this, something begins to shift. The mind starts to gather itself again. The scattered attention returns. The emotional noise softens. You begin to feel more whole, less pulled in different directions. There is also a sense of lightness that comes with this. When you stop carrying every person's energy, you create space within yourself. Space that was previously filled with tension that did not originate from you. Space that now allows your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own state to settle naturally. And in that space, something important happens. You begin to feel like yourself again, not a collection of everyone else's emotions, not a container for every problem you encountered, just you, as you are. And that is where true rest begins. Because the mind is no longer holding more than it needs to. It is no longer trying to process what does not belong to it. It is simply present, within its own boundaries. Calm, undivided, ready to let the night be what it was meant to be. A place where you return, not to everyone else, but to yourself. And as you begin to return to yourself without carrying everyone else with you, something deeper and more subtle begins to show itself. A quiet resistance, not loud, not obvious, but present, even when the body is tired, even when the mind has slowed. There is still something that hesitates. Because for many people, sleep is not just rest. It is exposure. There is a strange tension that appears right before sleep. You feel it in the small delays, reaching for your phone one more time, playing something in the background, keeping a little noise, a little light, a little distraction, just enough to avoid fully settling into stillness. It does not feel like fear, but it is. Not fear of sleep itself, but fear of what comes with it. Because sleep requires something most people are not used to anymore. Stillness. No movement, no distraction, no escape into activity. Just you, and whatever remains when everything else fades. And for many, that moment is uncomfortable, not because something is wrong, but because something has been avoided. All day, the mind stays occupied. Tasks, conversations, screens, responsibilities. There is always something to focus on, something to respond to, something to think about. And this constant movement keeps deeper thoughts at a distance. But when night comes, that distance disappears. Stillness removes the buffer, and whatever has been sitting quietly beneath the surface begins to rise. Unfinished emotions, unclear thoughts, subtle anxieties, questions you did not want to ask, feelings you did not have time to process. They do not arrive to harm you. They arrive because there is finally space for them to be seen. But instead of seeing this as a natural process, many people interpret it as discomfort to avoid. So they delay sleep. They keep the mind busy. They stay just active enough to avoid fully entering that quiet space. And over time, this becomes a pattern, a quiet resistance to stillness itself. Marcus Aurelius did not run from stillness. He used it. He understood that the mind needs moments without distraction to return to clarity, that without stillness there is no opportunity to see what is actually happening inside, and without seeing clearly, the same patterns continue, unnoticed. This is why fear of sleep is often misunderstood. It is not about the act of sleeping. It is about what sleep demands before it arrives. A willingness to be still, a willingness to be present, a willingness to face what has been pushed aside. But here is where the shift begins. Stillness is not the enemy. It is the doorway. The discomfort you feel in that quiet moment is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is finally being noticed. And when you stop resisting it, it begins to change. The thoughts may still come. The feelings may still rise. But instead of reacting, instead of trying to escape, you allow them to be there. You observe them. You sit with them. Not to solve them immediately, but to understand that they are part of your inner world, not something to run from. And as you do this, something unexpected happens. The intensity begins to fade, because much of what creates fear is resistance. When you stop resisting, the mind no longer needs to push as hard. The thoughts lose their urgency. The feelings lose their pressure. They become quieter, not because they disappeared, but because they are no longer being avoided. This is where stillness becomes safe. Not because everything inside you is perfect, but because you are no longer trying to escape it. And from that safety, rest begins to form. You no longer delay sleep. You no longer fill the night with distractions. You begin to trust the quiet. You begin to see that what rises in stillness is not there to trap you, but to pass through you. And the more you allow that process, the easier it becomes. The mind learns that stillness is not a threat. It is a return to what has always been there beneath the noise, a return to clarity, a return to yourself. And as that understanding deepens, the fear that once hid beneath the surface begins to dissolve. You no longer resist the night. You enter it, not as something to get through, but as something that gently brings you back to balance, back to quiet, back to rest. And as stillness becomes something you no longer run from, another truth begins to rise in that quiet space, not about your thoughts, not about others, but about you, the version of you that showed up today, not perfect, not flawless, just human. There is a subtle discomfort that appears when the day ends and everything slows down, a quiet awareness of where you could have done better, where you hesitated, where you reacted instead of responding, and without noticing, the mind begins to measure you against an invisible standard, a version of yourself that never makes mistakes, that always says the right thing, that always stays calm, always acts wisely, always gets it right. And when you compare yourself to that version, you fall short. Every time. This is where the pressure begins. Not from the day itself, but from the expectation of perfection. You start to feel like you should have handled things differently, that you should have been more patient, more focused, more disciplined. And while some of that reflection can be useful, it often turns into something heavier. A quiet disappointment in yourself, a sense that you were not enough. Marcus Aurelius faced this same human tendency, but he approached it differently. He did not expect perfection from himself. He expected effort guided by awareness. He knew that growth does not come from demanding flawless behavior, but from understanding where you stand clearly and honestly. This is the Stoic way of review, not harsh, not emotional, just clear. You look at the day as it was. You notice where you acted well. You notice where you could improve. And you accept both without turning either into a story about your worth, because your worth is not determined by one day, or one moment, or one mistake. But the mind often forgets this. It focuses on what was imperfect, as if that defines everything else. It ignores the parts where you showed up, where you tried, where you handled things as best as you could in that moment. And it builds a narrow view of the day, one that highlights flaws while hiding effort. This is why making peace with yourself is so important before sleep. Not because you did everything right, but because you are willing to see yourself fully. Not just the mistakes, not just the awkward moments, but the whole picture. The effort you gave, the intentions you carried, the fact that you are still learning, still adjusting, still moving forward. Peace does not come from pretending you were perfect. It comes from accepting that you were not, and that it is okay. There is a quiet strength in this acceptance. You stop fighting the version of yourself that showed up today. You stop wishing you could go back and rewrite every moment. You begin to understand that growth does not require you to reject who you were a few hours ago. It requires you to understand them, and then move forward with that understanding. This changes the tone of your night. Instead of lying down with frustration, you lie down with clarity. Instead of replaying everything that went wrong, you acknowledge it once and let it settle. Instead of carrying disappointment, you carry awareness. And awareness is lighter because it does not judge, it guides. There is also a kind of relief that comes with letting go of perfection. You no longer feel like every day is a test you must pass. You no longer measure yourself against an impossible standard. You begin to see each day as part of a longer process, one that includes mistakes, adjustments, and progress over time. And in that perspective, today becomes just one step, not a final judgment, not a fixed identity, just a moment in your path. This allows the mind to rest, because it is no longer trying to fix everything at once. It is no longer trying to become perfect overnight. It simply accepts where it is and trusts that improvement will come through continued awareness, not pressure. So as you lie there, you begin to release the need to be flawless. You allow the version of you that existed today to be enough for this moment. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And that is enough for peace. Because the night is not asking you to be better. It is asking you to rest. And when you make peace with who you were today, you give yourself the space to become something clearer tomorrow, without shame, without pressure, just steady, quiet growth. And as you begin to make peace with the version of you that showed up today, something else begins to soften, a quiet expectation you may not have even noticed you were carrying. The expectation that every day should feel meaningful, that it should be productive, fulfilling, memorable, somehow special, and when it isn't, A subtle disappointment begins to form. There is a quiet pressure many people live under, not just to do well, but to feel something significant every single day, to end the day with a sense of achievement, clarity, or emotional reward. And when the day feels ordinary, slow, or uneventful, it starts to feel like something is missing, like the day did not count, like it slipped by without value. But this expectation quietly creates restlessness. Because most days are not dramatic. Most days are simple. They move in small actions, quiet moments, routine steps. And when you demand that each one must stand out, must feel important, must give you something big, you begin to overlook what is already there. You begin to feel dissatisfied without knowing why. Marcus Aurelius did not expect every day to be extraordinary. He focused on showing up with consistency, with clarity, with alignment. He understood that a good life is not built from a few exceptional days, but from many ordinary ones lived well. This is where the quiet freedom begins. When you need less from the day becomes lighter. You stop asking it to prove its worth. You stop measuring it by how exciting, productive, or emotionally rich it was. You begin to see it differently. Not as something that must impress you, but as something you simply lived. There is a deep calm in this shift, because disappointment loses its foundation. Disappointment often comes from the gap between what you expected and what actually happened. The higher the expectation, the greater the gap feels. But when you release the need for the day to be exceptional, that gap disappears. The day no longer has to meet a standard. It just has to be experienced. This changes how the mind processes the night. Instead of scanning for what was missing, it begins to accept what was present. A conversation, a task completed, a moment of quiet. Even the simple act of getting through the day becomes enough. And in that acceptance, tension fades. You are no longer trying to squeeze meaning out of every moment. You are allowing meaning to exist in what already is. There is also a subtle exhaustion that comes from constantly seeking emotional highs, wanting every day to feel good, to feel fulfilling, to feel rewarding. But life does not move in constant peaks. It moves in rhythms, highs and lows, activity and stillness, clarity and uncertainty. When you demand only the highs, you begin to resist the natural flow, and resistance creates fatigue. But when you allow the day to be simple, even quiet, something shifts. You stop fighting what is normal. You stop judging the day for being what most days are. And instead, you begin to rest within it. This is where Stoic perspective becomes grounding. You remind yourself that not every day needs to stand out to matter, that consistency is more valuable than intensity, that showing up, even in ordinary moments, is what shapes your life over time. And suddenly, the day feels enough. Not because it was perfect, not because it gave you everything you wanted, but because it did not need to. This brings a quiet sense of relief. You no longer carry the disappointment of what the day lacked. You no longer replay it, trying to find something more. You simply let it be what it was. And that allows the mind to settle. Because it is no longer searching. It is no longer comparing. It is no longer asking for more. It is at rest. This is the freedom of needing less. Not less effort, not less presence, but less expectation. Less demand for the day to perform for you. Less pressure for life to constantly feel significant. And in that space, something deeper begins to emerge. A quiet contentment. A steady calm. The ability to lie down at night without feeling like something was missing. Because nothing was missing, you lived the day. And that is enough. And as that understanding settles in, the night becomes lighter. not filled with evaluation, not filled with quiet disappointment, but with a simple sense of completion, not perfect, not dramatic, just whole enough to let go. And as you begin to need less from the day, another quiet pressure starts to loosen, one that has been sitting deeper than most people realize, because even when the day is accepted, even when expectations soften, there is still a part of the mind that refuses to rest. It keeps whispering the same thing, not yet, not until everything is figured out. There is a hidden condition many people place on sleep, a silent agreement the mind makes with itself. I will rest once I understand everything, once I solve this problem, once I feel certain about what comes next, once my life feels clearer than it does right now. And because life is rarely that clear, rest keeps getting delayed. The mind stays active, searching for answers that are not ready to be found. It moves from one problem to another, trying to connect everything, trying to create a sense of resolution before the night can begin. It feels responsible, it feels necessary, but underneath, it is exhausting. Because life is not something you solve in one sitting, and the mind, in trying to do so, creates a quiet trap. You begin to believe that peace is something you earn after everything makes sense. But what if it never fully does? Marcus Aurelius lived in constant uncertainty. Decisions without guaranteed outcomes, situations without clear answers, pressures that could not be resolved overnight. And yet he did not wait for perfect clarity to find rest. He understood something most people forget. Peace is not the result of certainty. It is the ability to remain steady without it. The mind often delays rest because it is uncomfortable with not knowing. It wants closure. It wants direction. It wants to feel in control of what comes next. And when those things are missing, it keeps working, keeps thinking, keeps searching. But this search does not always bring answers. It often brings more questions, more possibilities, more uncertainty. And so the mind stays awake, caught in a loop that never truly finishes. This is where Stoic wisdom creates a shift. Instead of trying to solve everything, you begin to accept the limits of what can be solved right now. You recognize that some problems require time, some answers require distance, some clarity only comes after rest, not before it. This changes how you approach the night. You stop asking, "Have I figured everything out?" And you start asking, "Is there anything I can actually do about this right now?" Most of the time, the answer is no. And that answer is not a failure. It is a release. Because once you see that there is nothing to do in this moment, the need to keep thinking begins to fade. The mind no longer has a task to complete. It no longer needs to stay active. It begins to slow down, not because everything is solved, but because there is nothing left to solve right now. This is where peace begins to form, not in certainty, but in acceptance. You accept that your life is still unfolding, that not everything needs to be clear tonight, that not every path needs to be fully mapped before you rest. And in that acceptance, something relaxes. The pressure to understand everything dissolves. The urgency fades. The mind begins to feel lighter, not because it has answers, but because it has stopped demanding them. There is also a quiet trust that grows here, a trust that you will handle what comes when it comes, that you do not need to prepare for every possibility in advance, that your strength does not come from constant thinking, but from clarity that returns when you are rested. This trust allows the mind to let go, not forever, just for now, just for the night. And that is enough, because sleep is not meant to be earned by solving your life. It is meant to restore you so you can live it. When you stop delaying rest until everything feels resolved, You give yourself permission to exist in the middle of uncertainty without fear. You begin to see that life does not pause while you figure it out. It continues, and you move with it, step by step, not all at once. So as you lie down, you release the need to understand everything. You release the need to have answers. You release the idea that peace comes only after clarity. And you allow yourself to rest, even in the unknown, because the night is not asking you to solve your life. It is asking you to trust that you do not need to. And as you begin to release the need to solve everything before you rest, another tension quietly rises into awareness. Not about problems, not about the future, but about something far more subtle. What people think of you. Even after the day is over, even when no one is speaking, even when the room is completely still, the mind continues a silent performance. It replays how you were seen, how you sounded, how you appeared in the eyes of others, and without realizing it, you are still trying to manage your image, long after the moment has passed. There is a quiet burden in this, the need to control perception, to make sure you were understood the right way, to correct how you might have been judged, to protect your image, even in your own thoughts. And the more you try to manage this, the less the mind is able to rest, because people's opinions are not something you can settle in your head. They are shifting, unclear, often unspoken. One person may admire you, another may misunderstand you, a third may not even think about you at all. And yet, the mind tries to gather all of these invisible impressions and organize them into something stable, something safe. But it never works, because perception is not yours to control. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself of this again and again, that people will think what they think, based on their own perspective, their own experiences, their own inner world, and trying to control that is like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you grip, the more it slips away. This is where social image becomes a quiet addiction, not always obvious, not always loud, but persistent. You begin to depend on being seen a certain way to feel at ease. You measure your day not just by what you did, but by how it might have looked. And when there is any uncertainty, any doubt about how you were perceived, the mind keeps working, trying to fix it, trying to clarify it, trying to rewrite it, but the moment is already gone. And so the mind keeps circling something that no longer exists. This creates a kind of mental unrest that is difficult to name because it feels like you are thinking. But you are actually holding tension. You are trying to stabilize something that is inherently unstable. And the more you try, the more restless you become. Stoicism offers a different foundation, not one built on perception, but on inner dignity. Dignity is quiet. It does not depend on approval. It does not shift based on opinion. It comes from knowing how you acted and standing by that. When you begin to anchor yourself in this, something changes. You no longer need to manage how you were seen. You return to how you showed up. Did you act with honesty? Did you stay aligned with your values? Did you do what you believed was right in that moment? If the answer is yes, then the rest is not yours to carry. And if the answer is no, then you correct it within yourself, not in the imagined minds of others. This is where calm begins to form. Because you are no longer chasing approval in the dark. You are no longer trying to reconstruct how others may have judged you. You are grounded in something that does not move, your own understanding. There is also a quiet relief in letting go of image. You stop performing in your own mind. You stop adjusting yourself based on imagined reactions. You stop replaying moments just to make them look better, and instead, you allow them to be what they were. Not perfect, not controlled, just real. This does not make you careless. It makes you free. Free from the constant need to be seen a certain way. free from the pressure of managing every impression, free from carrying a version of yourself that exists only in the minds of others. And in that freedom, the mind begins to rest, because it is no longer divided, no longer split between who you are and who you think you need to appear to be. You become whole again, undivided, grounded, and as you lie there, no longer trying to control what cannot be controlled, something quiet settles within you, a sense that you are enough, not because everyone sees you that way, but because you no longer need them to. And from that place, sleep becomes natural, not forced, not delayed, just something that arrives. When the need to be seen finally fades into stillness, and as you begin to let go of how you are seen by others, another quiet source of unrest begins to reveal itself, not from outside, not from people, but from within your own direction. Because even when you release control, even when you stop chasing approval, the mind can still feel scattered, pulled in different directions, unsettled without knowing exactly why. There is a kind of fatigue that does not come from doing too much, but from lacking order in how you live. A subtle disconnection between what you value, what you do, and where you are going. And when these are not aligned, the mind does not rest easily. It becomes noisy, not because there is too much happening, but because nothing feels anchored. You move through the day reacting to things as they come. One task leads to another, one distraction pulls you away, one obligation replaces the next. There is movement, but not always direction, and by the time night arrives, the mind has no clear sense of completion. It feels unfinished, not in tasks, but in structure. This is where mental fatigue deepens, because the mind does not only need rest from effort, it needs clarity from confusion. When there is no inner order, everything feels equally urgent. Small things feel heavy. Simple decisions feel draining. The mind keeps switching, adjusting, reacting, without ever settling into a steady rhythm. And this constant shifting creates a quiet chaos that follows you into the night. You lie down, but the mind is still scattered, jumping from one thought to another, from one concern to the next, not because the problems are large, but because there is no structure holding them in place. Marcus Aurelius understood the importance of inner order, not as rigid control, but as alignment. He guided his life through clear values: what matters, what does not, what deserves attention, what can be ignored. And through this clarity, his actions became more focused, more intentional. This created a kind of internal rhythm, a steadiness that did not depend on how busy or chaotic the day was. When your values are clear, the mind knows where to stand. When your habits are consistent, the mind knows what to expect. When your purpose is understood, the mind knows what to prioritize. And when these are aligned, the noise begins to fade. But when they are not, the mind has to work harder. It has to decide everything in real time. What matters now? What should I focus on? What is important? And this constant questioning drains energy, not because the answers are difficult, but because they are not defined. This is why life without inner order feels heavier than it should. You are not only living, you are constantly figuring out how to live. And by night, that effort shows up as restlessness. Stoic structure offers a simple shift. You begin to define what matters before the moment demands it. You create small patterns that guide your day, not to control every detail, but to reduce unnecessary decisions. You align your actions with your values, so the mind does not have to question itself constantly. This does not remove all challenges, but it removes confusion, and confusion is often what keeps the mind active at night. When your day has structure, the night becomes clearer. The mind does not need to revisit everything. It does not need to organize chaos after the fact. It simply slows down because there is less to sort through. There is also a quiet sense of completion that comes from inner order, not because everything is finished, but because everything had its place. You did what mattered. You followed your direction. You moved in alignment with yourself. And that is enough. The mind no longer feels scattered. It feels settled. Not because the day was perfect, but because it made sense. This is what restores rhythm, a sense that your life is not random movement, but intentional flow. And when that rhythm is present, the night reflects it, the thoughts slow down, the transitions become smoother, the mind begins to trust that things are where they need to be. So it does not keep searching, it does not keep jumping, it rests, because there is order beneath the surface. And as you lie there, you begin to feel something that goes beyond simple calm. A quiet stability, a sense that you are not drifting, but grounded, not scattered, but aligned. And in that alignment, the mind finally finds a place to settle, not by force, but by rhythm. And as your inner world begins to regain a sense of order, something important becomes possible again. Not the kind of thinking that drains you, but the kind that clears you. Because when the mind is no longer scattered, no longer chasing everything at once, it can finally look back without becoming trapped. This is where a forgotten practice quietly returns, not to judge the day, but to understand it. There is a way of reviewing your day that does not create pressure, a way of looking back that does not pull you into overthinking or self-attack. But most people were never shown how to do this. So when they reflect, they do it with tension. They analyze too much. They focus on what went wrong. They turn a simple review into another form of mental noise. And because of that, they avoid it, or they suffer through it. But the Stoics approached this differently. For them, the evening was not a place of judgment. It was a place of clarity. Marcus Aurelius would quietly revisit his day, not to punish himself, but to see it as it was, without exaggeration, without emotion taking over. He understood that when you look clearly, the mind does not become heavier. It becomes lighter, because confusion is replaced with understanding. The key is not in whether you review your day, but in how you do it. If you approach it with obsession, the mind tightens. You begin to search for flaws. You replay moments over and over. You try to extract more than what is there, and the process becomes exhausting. It turns into another cycle of thinking that keeps you awake. But when you approach it with wisdom, something else happens. You look once, clearly, and that is enough. You notice what stood out, what went well, what could be improved. But you do not linger. You do not circle the same point. You do not turn it into a story about who you are. You simply see it and move on. This is what makes the inventory cleansing instead of agitating. It removes the need to keep thinking. Because once something has been seen properly, it does not need to be repeated. There is also a quiet balance in this. You do not focus only on mistakes, and you do not ignore them either. You see the full picture, the effort you gave, the moments you handled well, the parts that need adjustment, all of it, without distortion. Because when you only look at what went wrong, the mind becomes heavy, and when you ignore what went wrong, the mind becomes unclear. But when you see both, the mind becomes stable. This stability is what allows you to rest, because there is nothing left to figure out, nothing left to replay, nothing left to correct in this moment. You have already done the work of understanding, and understanding is enough. Many people skip this step entirely. They either avoid reflection or they get lost in it. But the Stoic evening inventory sits in the middle, Not avoidance, not obsession, just awareness. It is brief, it is calm, it is honest. And because of that, it leaves the mind in a better state than it found it. There is also a sense of closure that comes from this. Not forced closure, but natural completion. You looked at the day, you understood it, you acknowledged it, and now it can end. The mind no longer needs to return to it, because it has already been processed. This is what most people are searching for when they overthink, a sense that they have fully seen what happened. But overthinking never gives that. It only repeats without clarity. The Stoic inventory gives clarity without repetition, and that changes everything. The night becomes quieter. The thoughts become fewer. The mind begins to trust that it does not need to keep working, because the important work has already been done. So as you lie there, you carry something different. Not a list of problems, not a weight of unfinished thoughts, but a simple understanding of your day, clear, balanced, complete enough to let go. And in that understanding, the mind naturally begins to settle. Not because you forced it to stop, but because there is nothing left for it to hold on to. Only quiet, only space, only rest. And as the day is finally seen clearly, without distortion, without pressure, something deeper begins to loosen, not just your thoughts, but the version of yourself you have been carrying for a long time. Because for many people, stress is not just something they experience. It becomes something they identify with. There is a quiet attachment to pressure that forms over time, a sense that being busy means being important. That feeling tense means you are doing something that matters. That constantly thinking, planning, worrying is part of who you are. And without it, something feels missing. So even when the night comes, even when the body asks for rest, the mind holds on to that tension. It keeps searching for something to solve, something to fix, something to prepare for, because stillness feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, not because something is wrong, but because you have been living in motion for so long. You have built an identity around it, the one who handles everything, the one who stays alert, the one who carries pressure without stopping. And while that may have helped you move through life, it quietly takes something from you. Your ability to simply be. Marcus Aurelius did not define himself by constant urgency. Even with all his responsibilities, he returned to a simpler understanding of himself, not as the sum of his pressures, but as a rational, steady mind, capable of clarity and calm. This is what many people forget. You are not your stress. You are the one experiencing it. But when stress becomes constant, the line begins to blur. You start to believe that without it, you would not function the same way. That letting go would mean losing control. That if you are not tense, you are falling behind. But this belief keeps the mind trapped, because it never allows you to step out of that state, even when it is no longer needed. This is why sleep becomes difficult. Not because the body cannot rest, but because the identity does not want to release control. It feels like you are letting go of something important, but what you are actually letting go of is unnecessary tension. Letting go of the identity built from stress is not about becoming careless. It is about becoming lighter. You begin to notice how often the mind creates urgency where none exists, how it holds on to pressure even when the moment does not require it, how it continues to push even when the body is asking to stop. And instead of following that pattern, you step back. You allow yourself to exist without constant tension. At first, this feels unfamiliar, because you are not used to meeting yourself without pressure, without urgency, without something to fix. But slowly, something begins to shift. You start to recognize a simpler version of yourself. one that is not driven by constant stress, one that does not need to carry everything at once, one that can be still without feeling like something is missing. This is where sleep begins to change. It is no longer just an escape from the day. It becomes a return to a state where you are not performing, not managing, not controlling, just existing, quietly, naturally. There is also a kind of relief in this. You no longer have to hold up the image of being constantly under pressure. You no longer have to prove your worth through tension. You no longer have to stay in a state of alertness just to feel like you are doing enough. You begin to understand that your value does not come from how stressed you are. It comes from how aligned you are. And alignment does not require urgency. It requires clarity. This allows the mind to soften in a way it has not in a long time. The constant edge begins to fade. The need to stay mentally active slows down. The body starts to follow, releasing the tightness it has been holding. And for the first time, stillness does not feel empty. It feels peaceful, because you are no longer trying to be someone who is always under pressure. You are simply being, and that is enough. So as you lie down, you begin to release that identity, not all at once, but gently, thought by thought, tension by tension. You allow yourself to step out of the role you have been playing all day and return to something simpler, something quieter, something more real. And in that return, sleep no longer feels like something you have to force. It becomes something that naturally finds you, because there is finally space for it to arrive. And as you begin to loosen your grip on the identity built from stress, another quiet distortion begins to reveal itself. Not about who you are all the time, but about how quickly the mind decides who you are after a single hard day. Because sometimes it only takes one moment, one failure, one rejection, one heavy experience. And suddenly, the mind begins to build a story much bigger than what actually happened. The day was difficult, but the mind turns it into something deeper. It begins to whisper things that feel final. Nothing is working. You are falling behind. This is who you are now. And without noticing, a temporary experience becomes something that feels permanent. This is how pain expands in the night. During the day there is movement, distraction, momentum. Even if something goes wrong, there are other things happening around it, other moments that soften its impact. But at night, everything slows down. The mind has space, and in that space, it begins to focus. And what it focuses on grows. The hard moment becomes the center. Everything else fades, and slowly, the mind begins to connect that moment to your identity. Not just, today was hard, but my life is hard. Not just, this didn't go well. But nothing ever goes well for me. This is where the danger lies. Not in the event itself, but in the story that forms around it. Marcus Aurelius understood that suffering becomes heavier when the mind adds judgment to it. The event may be painful, but when you attach meaning that defines who you are, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes identity, and identity is harder to release. This is why Stoicism teaches separation. You learn to separate what happened from what it means. A hard day is just that. A day. It has a beginning and an end. It does not define your entire path. It does not rewrite your future. It does not determine your worth. But the mind, especially at night, tries to connect it to everything. It pulls in past experiences. It projects into the future. It creates a pattern where there may only be a moment. And suddenly, what was small becomes overwhelming. This is how the night magnifies pain. Not because the pain grows on its own, but because the mind feeds it with interpretation. So the practice becomes clear. When the mind begins to build a story, you pause. You notice the shift from event to identity, from moment to meaning. And instead of following it, you gently step back. You return to what is actually true. Today was difficult. That is all. Nothing more needs to be added. This is not denial. It is clarity. You are not ignoring the pain. You are refusing to let it become something it is not. There is also a quiet discipline in not expanding suffering. The mind wants to connect dots, to create patterns, to make sense of what happened. But not every moment needs to become a larger story. Some things can remain small. And when you allow that, something changes. The weight decreases. The emotional intensity softens. The sense of being overwhelmed begins to fade. Because you are no longer carrying more than what actually exists. There is also a deeper understanding that begins to form. Your life is not one day. It is not one moment. It is not one experience. It is a series of days, of moments, of experiences, each one passing, each one changing. And when you hold on to one, as if it defines everything, you lose sight of that movement. You freeze yourself in something that was never meant to last. Stoicism brings you back to motion. It reminds you that this moment will pass, that tomorrow is not decided by today alone, that your identity is not built from isolated experiences, but from how you continue to move forward. This allows the mind to release its grip. You stop holding on to the day as if it is a final statement. You allow it to be what it was: difficult, uncomfortable, real, but not defining. And as you lie there, the story begins to dissolve. The mind stops connecting everything. The moment returns to its proper size, just a part of your day, not the whole of your life. And in that shift, something softens inside you. You are no longer trapped inside a narrative that feels heavy and permanent. You are simply someone who experienced a hard day, and that is something that can be rested from, something that can be released, something that does not need to follow you into tomorrow. And as that understanding settles, the night becomes lighter. Not because the day was easy, but because you no longer let it become everything. And as the weight of the day stops turning into a story about your entire life, another quiet force begins to reveal itself, not from pain this time, but from something that feels stronger, sharper, more protective. The need to be right, the need to win, the need to hold on to your position, even in silence. There is a part of the mind that does not want to let go, not because it is hurt, but because it feels challenged. It replays moments where you were misunderstood, where someone disagreed, where you felt dismissed or overlooked. And instead of softening, it tightens. It builds arguments. It sharpens responses. It imagines proving a point, even when no one is there to hear it. This is the ego at work, quietly disturbing your peace. It does not shout. It insists. It tells you that letting go means losing, that not defending yourself means you were wrong, that if you do not hold on to your position, something important about you will disappear. So the mind keeps holding. It stays alert. It keeps returning to the same moment, not to understand it, but to win it. And in doing so, it keeps you awake. Marcus Aurelius saw this clearly within himself. He understood that pride can be just as heavy as pain, that the need to be right can trap the mind as much as fear or regret. And he reminded himself often that most conflicts are not worth carrying beyond the moment they happen, because the cost is too high. You lose your peace. You lose your stillness. You lose the ability to rest over something that no longer exists. This is where humility becomes powerful, not as weakness, but as release. Becoming smaller than your ego at night does not mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking less about defending yourself. It means stepping out of the constant need to prove, to correct, to stand your ground in your own mind. It means asking a simple question: is this worth carrying into my rest? Most of the time, it is not. But the ego resists this, because it thrives on importance. It wants every moment to matter, every disagreement to be resolved, every misunderstanding to be corrected. But life does not require you to win every interaction, and your peace certainly does not. When you begin to see this, something shifts. You realize that holding on to these mental arguments is not strength, it is tension, and letting go is not losing. It is freeing. There is also a quiet relief in stepping back from your own importance. When everything feels personal, the mind stays active. It keeps defending, analyzing, reacting. But when you allow yourself to become smaller, when you stop placing yourself at the center of every moment, the pressure begins to fade. Not everything is about you. Not every reaction needs your response. Not every disagreement needs your correction. And that realization softens the entire inner experience. The mind begins to relax. The need to engage fades. The energy that was tied up in defending your position begins to release. This does not make you passive. It makes you peaceful. You still know who you are. You still stand by your values. But you do not need to prove them in every moment, especially not in your own thoughts at night. This is where humility becomes healing. You allow things to remain unresolved. You allow others to think what they think. You allow the moment to exist without your constant involvement. And in doing so, you step out of the mental struggle. You stop fighting invisible battles. You stop replaying conversations that no longer matter. You stop carrying the weight of being right. And what remains is quiet. A kind of quiet that does not need to defend anything. That does not need to win. That does not need to hold on to every detail. Just space. Just stillness. Just you. Without the pressure of proving yourself. And as you lie there, becoming smaller in this way, something unexpected happens. You feel lighter. Not because you lost something, but because you released something that was never necessary to carry into the night. And in that release, rest finds you more easily, because there is nothing left to protect, nothing left to prove, only a quiet return to yourself, without the weight of ego standing in the way. And as the need to win begins to loosen, another quieter need steps forward, one that feels softer, more human, but just as powerful. The need to be understood, not to prove something, not to win an argument, but to feel seen, to feel that someone truly gets what you meant, what you felt, what you were trying to say beneath the words. And when that does not happen, something lingers, a quiet discomfort that follows you into the night, because part of you is still waiting, still hoping the other person will realize, still wishing the moment could be clarified, still wanting to explain just one more time. So everything finally makes sense, and so the mind keeps returning to it, replaying the conversation, adding the words you didn't say, imagining how it could have been received differently, trying to close the gap between what you meant and what they understood. This is how the need to be understood keeps the mind awake. It does not feel like tension at first. It feels like something unfinished, something important, but underneath it is a form of attachment, an attachment to being recognized in a certain way. And when that recognition is uncertain, the mind keeps working, because it believes peace will come once the other person understands. But that moment may never arrive, not because you failed, but because understanding depends on more than just you. It depends on their perspective, their experiences, their state of mind. And no matter how clearly you explain yourself, You cannot fully control how it is received. Marcus Aurelius accepted this. He knew that people see the world through their own lens, that even the clearest truth can be misunderstood, and that trying to force understanding from others only creates more disturbance within yourself. So instead of chasing it, he returned to something more stable, his own clarity. This is where Stoic independence begins. You stop measuring your peace by whether others fully understand you. You stop waiting for that moment of perfect recognition. You stop replaying conversations just to reach a conclusion that depends on someone else. And instead, you ask yourself something simpler. Do I understand myself? Was I clear in my intention? Did I speak honestly as best as I could in that moment? If the answer is yes, then you have already done what was within your control. The rest is not yours to carry. This does not mean you stop caring about connection. It means you stop depending on it for peace. There is a difference. When you depend on being understood, every interaction becomes heavy. Every silence feels like rejection. Every misunderstanding feels like something that must be fixed. And the mind stays active, trying to bridge that gap again and again. But when you release that dependency, something softens. You allow space for misunderstanding without turning it into unrest. You accept that not every moment will be perfectly received. You trust that what needed to be said was said. And that is enough. There is also a quiet freedom in this. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself endlessly. You no longer feel pulled to correct every perception. You no longer carry the weight of how you were interpreted. You return to yourself, and in that return, the noise begins to fade. Because the mind is no longer chasing something outside of its control. It is grounded in what it knows, in what it intended, in what it expressed, and that grounding creates calm. The urge to replay the conversation weakens. The need to clarify every detail disappears. The emotional charge softens. And what remains is a quiet acceptance. Not everything needs to be understood for you to rest. Not everything needs to be resolved through explanation. Some things can remain as they are, and you can still be at peace. So as you lie there, you begin to release that need. Not by force, but by understanding its limit. You let the conversation be what it was. You let the silence remain. You let others hold their perspective, and you return to your own. Calm, clear, enough. And in that space, the heart begins to settle, because it is no longer waiting, no longer chasing, no longer holding on to something that does not belong to it, just resting in its own quiet truth. And as the need to be understood begins to soften, another pattern quietly reveals itself. One that feels stronger, more intense, almost like a battle that refuses to end, even when the day is over. Because sometimes, when you lie down, the mind does not just think, it fights. Not with the body, but with invisible opponents, a person who hurt you, a voice that criticized you, a memory that still feels unresolved, and suddenly, the night becomes filled with silent confrontations. You argue, you defend, you explain, you prove your point, all within your own mind. And the strange part is, no one else is there. But the emotional energy feels real. The tension builds, the body tightens, the mind sharpens its words, as if the moment is happening again. This is emotional combat, and it keeps the mind far from rest. It often begins quietly, a small thought about someone, a memory of something that felt unfair, and before you realize it, the mind is no longer observing, it is participating, fully engaged, replaying the situation, but this time with more force, more clarity, more control. Because this time, you want to win. You want to say what you didn't say. You want to respond in a way that feels stronger. You want to correct the imbalance. But no matter how many times you replay it, the outcome never truly satisfies, because the fight is not real. It exists only in your mind. And yet, it consumes real energy. Marcus Aurelius understood that carrying conflict beyond the moment only disturbs your own peace. He reminded himself that other people act based on their own understanding, their own nature, and that continuing to fight them in your thoughts does not change them. It only keeps you tied to the conflict. This is where the shift begins. You start to see that the mind is not just remembering, it is engaging, and once you see that, you have a choice: to continue the fight or to step out of it. The art of lying down without entering emotional combat is not about suppressing thoughts. It is about refusing to participate in them. When the mind brings up a person or a moment, you notice it. You recognize the pull, the urge to respond, to defend, to argue, and instead of following it, you pause. You do nothing. No response, no continuation, no engagement. At first, this feels incomplete. The mind wants to finish the argument. It wants closure. It wants to feel like something has been resolved. But over time, you begin to see that these imagined battles never truly resolve anything. They only repeat. And the more you engage, the stronger the pattern becomes. Stepping out of it breaks the cycle. Not immediately, but gradually. The mind learns that it does not need to enter every fight it presents, that not every thought requires a response, that not every memory needs to be relived. There is also a deeper understanding that forms here. Most of these battles are not about the other person anymore. They are about the feeling you are still holding, the frustration, the hurt, the need to be seen or respected. And when you stop engaging in the argument, you begin to feel what is underneath it. Not the fight, but the emotion. And that emotion, when allowed without resistance, begins to soften. Because it is no longer being fueled by conflict, it is simply being experienced. This is where real release happens, not through winning the argument, but through no longer needing to fight it. There is also a quiet strength in this. You are no longer reacting to every internal trigger. You are choosing where your energy goes. You are protecting your rest, and that protection is not passive. It is intentional. You are deciding that the night is not a place for battle. It is a place for recovery, for stillness, for letting the mind step out of conflict entirely. So as you lie there, and the mind tries to pull you into another argument, you recognize it. You see the pattern, and instead of stepping in, you step back. You let the thought pass. You let the moment fade. You let the fight end without a winner, because there does not need to be one. And as that space opens, something shifts. The tension releases. The sharpness softens. The mind no longer feels like it is in motion. It begins to settle, because there is nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove, nothing left to fight. Only quiet, only stillness, only the simple act of being at rest, without carrying a battlefield into the night. And as the mind begins to step out of those silent battles, another truth starts to emerge. One that quietly changes the way you see everything that has been disturbing you. Because even the strongest thoughts do not stay forever. Even the heaviest feelings do not last as long as they claim they will. But in the moment, it rarely feels that way. When something unsettles you at night, it can feel permanent. The anxiety feels like it will stay. The discomfort feels like it defines the entire moment. The thought repeats so often that it begins to feel fixed, like something that will not leave. And this is where the mind gets trapped, not just in the disturbance itself, but in the belief that it will not pass. Marcus Aurelius understood something simple but deeply powerful. Everything changes. Every emotion, every thought, every situation, no matter how intense it feels, no matter how real it seems, it is already moving. But the mind resists this. It holds on to the moment, trying to analyze it, control it, understand it completely, and in doing so, it freezes something that was meant to flow. It turns a passing disturbance into something that feels permanent. This is why anxiety grows stronger at night, because the mind begins to believe in its own projections. It says, this feeling will stay. This problem will not go away. This is how things are now. But these are not facts. They are interpretations, built from a moment that is already changing. Stoic awareness gently breaks this illusion. It reminds you that what you are feeling right now is not fixed. It is passing. Even if it returns later, even if it feels intense, even if it stays for a while, it is not permanent. It is part of a process, not a final state. This changes how you experience it. Instead of resisting the feeling, you begin to observe it. You notice how it rises, how it shifts, how it softens, even slightly, when you stop holding on to it. You begin to see that it is not as solid as it first appeared, and in that realization, the grip loosens. There is also a quiet comfort in remembering impermanence, not in a distant philosophical way, but in a practical sense. The thought that is bothering you now will not feel the same tomorrow. The emotion that feels overwhelming will not stay at this intensity. The situation that feels unclear will change, even if slowly. And knowing this creates space between you and the disturbance. You are no longer fully inside it. You are watching it move. This is where night-based despair begins to weaken. Because despair often comes from the belief that things will not improve, that what you feel now is what you will always feel. But when you remember that everything shifts, that belief loses its strength. You begin to see that this moment is not the whole story. It is just a part of it. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself of the passing nature of all things, not to become detached from life, but to remain grounded within it, to avoid being overwhelmed by what is temporary, to remember that no matter how strong something feels, it will not remain unchanged. This perspective brings a quiet steadiness. You stop reacting as if every thought is urgent. You stop treating every feeling as final. You begin to allow things to move without trying to fix them immediately, and this allows the mind to relax, because it no longer feels trapped. It no longer feels like it has to escape something permanent. It understands that what is happening is already in motion. There is also a kind of patience that grows here. You do not rush the feeling to disappear. You do not force the thought to stop. You simply allow it to pass at its own pace, and in doing so, it often passes more quickly, because resistance is what keeps it in place. So as you lie there, and something begins to disturb you, you gently remind yourself, this will not last. Not as a way to dismiss it, but as a way to see it clearly. It is here now, but it is not here forever. And that understanding softens everything. The intensity fades. The urgency disappears. The mind begins to feel less crowded, because it is no longer trying to hold on to something that is already leaving. And in that quiet awareness, something shifts. You are no longer overwhelmed by the disturbance. You are simply witnessing it, and as it moves, you remain steady, calm, present, unshaken by something that no longer feels permanent. And in that steadiness, rest begins to return. And as you begin to see how everything passes, another truth quietly steps into the light, one that many people avoid during the day. but cannot escape at night. Because when everything becomes still, what you have is no longer what matters. What you feel is. There is a strange contrast that appears in the quiet. During the day, life is filled with movement, goals, progress, achievement. You chase, you build, you accumulate. And on the surface it looks like you are moving forward, like you are gaining something meaningful. But when the night comes, none of that noise follows you into stillness. The money stays where it is. The status fades into silence. The achievements stop speaking. And what remains is your inner state. This is where the difference becomes clear. Possession and peace are not the same thing. You can have much and still feel unsettled. You can achieve a lot and still lie awake. You can build a life that looks complete and still feel something missing when everything slows down. Because possession fills the outside, but peace lives within. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He lived in a position of power, surrounded by wealth, influence, and responsibility. Yet he did not rely on any of it to create calm. He knew that external success does not guarantee internal order, and without inner order, the mind does not rest. This is why night can feel uncomfortable for many people. Not because something is wrong, but because something is revealed. The distractions are gone. The roles are gone. The identity built from what you have becomes quiet, and in that quiet, you meet yourself without all of it. If there is disorder inside, it becomes visible. If there is tension, it surfaces. If there is emptiness, it cannot be covered. This is not a punishment. It is clarity. The night does not create unrest. It exposes it. During the day, you can fill your time with action. You can distract yourself with progress, with goals, with constant movement. But at night, there is nothing left to hold on to. And if your peace depends on what you have, instead of who you are, the mind begins to feel unstable. This is why some of the most successful people still struggle to rest. Not because they lack anything externally, but because something internally is unsettled. The Stoic path does not reject success. It simply places it in its proper place. You can pursue achievement. You can build, create, grow. But you do not depend on it for peace, because peace must exist before, during, and after all of that. Otherwise, you are always chasing something that never fully satisfies. There is also a quiet illusion that begins to break here. The idea that once you reach a certain point, everything will feel calm, that once you have enough, you will finally rest. But the night reveals that this is not true, because rest does not come from having more. It comes from needing less, from being settled within yourself, regardless of what surrounds you. When you understand this, something shifts. You stop expecting external things to quiet your mind. You stop placing your peace in what can change, disappear, or never fully satisfy. You begin to return to something more stable, your inner state, your alignment, your clarity, and from there, everything else becomes lighter. There is also a kind of honesty that comes with this realization. You begin to see that the discomfort you feel at night is not something to escape, but something to understand. It is showing you where your inner world needs attention, not more achievement, not more possession, but more order, more clarity, more alignment with yourself. And when you begin to work from that place, the difference becomes clear. You can have success and still feel peaceful. Not because success gave you peace, but because you built peace within yourself. So as you lie there in the quiet, you begin to release the belief that what you have will carry you into rest. You let go of the idea that external things can settle internal noise. and you return to something simpler, something steady, something that does not depend on possession. Just you, as you are, in this moment, and in that return, the mind begins to quiet in a deeper way. Not because everything is perfect, but because nothing is being used to cover what needs to be seen. And in that clarity, peace becomes real, not borrowed, not temporary, but something that remains, even when everything else fades into the night. And as you begin to see that nothing outside you can guarantee peace, another quiet struggle comes into focus, not about what you have, but about what you need to know. Because even in stillness, the mind keeps asking, what will happen? What does this mean? What should I do next? There is a deep craving that follows many people into the night, the craving for certainty, the need to understand everything clearly before allowing the body to rest. And when that clarity does not come, the mind refuses to settle. It keeps searching. It keeps questioning. It keeps turning possibilities over and over, as if one more thought will finally unlock the answer. But the answer often does not come, and so the mind stays awake, waiting. There is a quiet discomfort in not knowing, a sense that something is unfinished, that you are not fully prepared, that without clarity you are somehow at risk. And this discomfort drives the thinking, not because the thoughts are helpful, but because they promise relief. If I figure this out, I will feel calm. If I understand this, I can finally rest. But what happens is the opposite. The more you search, the more uncertain things can feel, because life is not always ready to give you clear answers, especially not in the middle of the night. Marcus Aurelius understood this tension. He lived with constant uncertainty, decisions without guarantees, paths without full visibility, and yet he did not wait for complete clarity to find calm. He trained his mind to remain steady, even when answers were incomplete. This is the Stoic ability, to live without full certainty and still remain at peace. It begins with recognizing something simple. Not everything needs to be known right now. Some things unfold with time. Some answers arrive through action, not thought. Some clarity only comes after rest, not before it. But the mind resists this. It believes that knowing everything will make you safe. That certainty will remove all risk. That if you can just figure it out, you will feel in control. But certainty is not always available, and chasing it endlessly creates more unrest than it resolves. This is where the shift begins. Instead of trying to eliminate uncertainty, you learn to allow it. You stop treating it as a problem and start seeing it as part of life. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop demanding answers in moments where they cannot be found. You notice the thoughts that keep asking for clarity, and instead of following them, you gently step back. You remind yourself, this does not need to be solved tonight. That single recognition begins to soften the pressure, because the mind no longer has a task to complete. It no longer needs to search endlessly. It can begin to rest, even without resolution. There is also a deeper understanding that grows here. You realize that you have lived through uncertainty before, many times, moments where you did not know what would happen, yet you moved through them, not perfectly, but sufficiently. You adapted, you responded, you found your way, and you will do the same again. But only if you allow yourself to rest now. This creates a quiet trust, not in having all the answers, but in your ability to handle what comes. And that trust reduces the need for constant thinking, because you no longer feel like everything must be figured out in advance. You begin to see that peace does not come from knowing everything. It comes from accepting that you do not need to. This acceptance is not passive, it is freeing. You release the need to resolve every uncertainty before sleep. You allow questions to remain unanswered. You allow life to remain open. And in that openness, the mind begins to relax. The thoughts may still appear, but they lose their urgency. They no longer demand your full attention. They become quieter, softer, less insistent, because you are no longer feeding them with the need for immediate certainty. So as you lie there and the mind asks its questions, you listen, but you do not follow. You acknowledge the uncertainty without trying to close it. You allow the unknown without resisting it. And slowly, something shifts. The tension fades. The searching slows. The mind begins to feel at ease, not because it has answers, but because it no longer needs them to rest. And in that quiet acceptance, sleep begins to arrive. Not as a reward for certainty, but as a natural response to letting go of the need for it. And as you begin to let go of the need for certainty, another source of restlessness quietly comes into view, not from your thoughts alone, but from what you keep feeding them. Because even when the day is over, the mind is rarely allowed to slow down. There is always one more scroll, one more video, one more piece of information, one more distraction before sleep. And it feels harmless. It feels like a way to relax, to unwind, to escape the weight of the day. But underneath, something else is happening. The mind is being pulled apart, fragmented, piece by piece. Modern life has created a kind of stimulation that never fully stops. The moment one thought fades, another appears. The moment one image passes, another replaces it. There is no pause, no space, no silence long enough for the mind to gather itself. And without that space, the mind cannot settle. It stays active, not in a focused way, but in a scattered one, jumping from one thing to another, never fully resting on anything long enough to feel complete. This is why, even after hours of passive distraction, the mind still feels tired, not rested, because it has not been allowed to slow down. It has only been kept busy. Marcus Aurelius lived in a world without constant noise, but he understood something that applies even more today. The mind becomes what it repeatedly consumes, and when it is constantly filled with stimulation, it loses its ability to return to stillness. It forgets how to be quiet. This is where the damage begins. Not immediately, but gradually, the attention becomes weaker. The patience fades. The ability to sit with a single thought becomes difficult. And when night comes, instead of easing into rest, the mind continues the pattern. It keeps searching for something to hold on to, something to watch, something to engage with. Because stillness feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. This is not because stillness is wrong. It is because it has been replaced. Reclaiming the evening begins with a simple realization. Not everything that feels like rest actually restores you. Some things only delay your exhaustion. The endless scrolling, the constant stimulation, the need to fill every quiet moment. These do not calm the mind. They keep it active in a different way. And when you finally stop, the mind does not know how to settle on its own. It has been trained to expect more. More input, more movement, more noise. Stoic simplicity offers a return, not to a world without technology, but to a way of using it with awareness. You begin to create space in the evening, small at first, moments where there is no screen, no external input, just quiet. At first, this feels uncomfortable, because the mind begins to surface what has been buried under constant distraction. Thoughts appear, feelings rise. The same patterns you have been avoiding begin to show themselves. But this is not a step backward, it is a step into clarity, because once the noise fades, The mind begins to reorganize itself. It starts to slow down, to gather, to settle. This is what has been missing, not more stimulation, but more space. There is also a depth that returns here. When the mind is not constantly pulled outward, it begins to move inward again. Thoughts become clearer. Emotions become easier to understand. The inner world, which was once fragmented, begins to feel whole again. And from that wholeness, calm begins to grow. You no longer feel scattered. You no longer feel pulled in multiple directions. You begin to feel grounded, present, still. This is where the evening becomes something different. Not a time to escape, but a time to return. A return to yourself. A return to simplicity. A return to a mind that is not overloaded, not fragmented, not constantly searching for something else. Just here, quiet, enough. So as you move into the night, you begin to let go of the need to fill every moment. You allow space to exist. You allow silence to remain. You allow your mind to slow down without forcing it, and slowly, the noise begins to fade. The restlessness softens. The constant pull disappears. And what remains is something that has been there all along, a natural stillness, a quiet depth, a sense of calm that does not come from distraction, but from finally having the space to be. And in that space, sleep no longer feels distant. It feels close, natural, waiting for you. The moment you stop filling the night with everything but rest, and as the noise of constant stimulation begins to fade, something quieter but deeper comes into focus. Not what you are doing, but what you are wanting. Because even in stillness, desire keeps the mind moving. There is a subtle pull that does not stop when the day ends, a feeling that something more is needed, something better, something different from what is already here. And even when the body lies down, that pull continues. It whispers, "This is not enough. You need more. You should be further. You should feel different." And just like that, the mind starts moving again. This is the unseen link between desire and restlessness. It is not always about big goals or obvious ambitions. Sometimes it is small. Wanting the day to have gone differently, wanting a better outcome, wanting more recognition, wanting a different feeling than the one you are sitting with. And each of these desires creates movement, because desire is never still. It reaches, it compares, it imagines. It pulls you away from what is, into what could be. And while this can drive action during the day, at night it creates disturbance, because the mind cannot rest while it is still reaching. Marcus Aurelius saw this clearly. He understood that the more you depend on external things to feel complete, the more your mind stays unsettled, because those things are always changing, always uncertain, always just out of full control, and when your peace depends on them, it becomes unstable. Desire, in itself, is not the problem. It is the attachment to it. The belief that something must be different before you can feel calm, that something must be added, improved, achieved, or changed before you can rest. This belief keeps the mind active, because it creates a condition. I will be at peace when this happens. I will relax when this changes. I will feel settled when I get what I want. But those conditions are rarely met all at once, and so the mind keeps waiting, keeps reaching, keeps moving, even when there is nothing to do. This is where restlessness grows, not from lack, but from craving. The Stoic shift is simple, but powerful. You begin to reduce the intensity of your desires, not by removing them completely, but by loosening your attachment to them. You stop demanding that life match your expectations before you can feel calm. You stop measuring your state by what is missing. You begin to accept what is already here. And in that acceptance, the movement slows. This is moderation, not denial, not suppression, just balance. You still want things, you still move forward, but you are not pulled by every desire that appears. You are not constantly reaching for something else. You allow the present moment to be enough, even if it is not perfect. This changes the entire rhythm of the mind, because when you are no longer chasing, you can finally stop. The urge to think fades, the comparisons quiet down, the need for something different softens, and what remains is stillness. There is also a quiet satisfaction that begins to grow here, not from achieving more, but from needing less. You begin to feel content with simple things, a calm breath, a quiet room, a moment without pressure, and this contentment creates space. Space where the mind does not need to move, where it does not need to search, where it can simply rest. This is what invites sleep. Not exhaustion, not distraction, but a lack of craving. A state where nothing is being chased, nothing is being resisted, nothing is being demanded, just presence, just enoughness. So as you lie there and the mind begins to reach for something more, you notice it, you see the desire, you feel the pull, and instead of following it, you gently let it pass. You remind yourself, this moment does not need to be different for me to rest. This is enough. And as that understanding settles, the movement begins to slow. The restlessness fades. The mind becomes quiet. Not because everything has been fulfilled, but because nothing is being chased anymore. And in that quiet, sleep finds you naturally, not as something you force, but as something that arrives when the need for more finally dissolves into enough. And as the need for more begins to quiet down, another hidden pattern slowly comes into view. Not about what you want, but about what you are used to feeling. Because for some people, calm feels unfamiliar, almost empty. There is a strange pull toward intensity, toward emotional movement, toward something happening inside. And when that movement is not there, the mind begins to search for it. It creates it, without realizing it. This is how emotional drama quietly becomes addictive, not in an obvious way, but in a subtle, repeated pattern. You get used to feeling something strong, stress, urgency, conflict, excitement mixed with tension. And over time, that intensity begins to feel normal, even necessary, because it gives you a sense of being alive, of being engaged, of something happening. So when the night comes and everything slows down, the absence of that intensity feels strange. The calm feels flat, the stillness feels incomplete, and the mind, without thinking, begins to recreate the familiar. It pulls up memories, replays situations, imagines conflict, builds emotional movement where there was none, not because it wants to suffer, but because it is used to stimulation, used to feeling something. This is the hidden loop. You do not seek drama consciously, but your system has learned to depend on it. And that dependency keeps the mind active, even when the body is ready to rest. Marcus Aurelius understood that the mind can become conditioned by what it repeatedly experiences. If you constantly live in reaction, in urgency, in emotional intensity, the mind begins to expect it. It loses its ability to settle into calm without feeling like something is missing. This is why peace can feel uncomfortable at first, not because it is wrong, but because it is unfamiliar. And anything unfamiliar feels unstable until it becomes known. Stoicism retrains this pattern, not by forcing calm, but by gradually reducing the need for intensity. You begin to notice when the mind is creating unnecessary drama, when it is pulling you into emotional loops that do not need to continue, when it is turning small moments into something larger, just to feel something, and instead of feeding that pattern, you step back. You allow the moment to remain simple, even if it feels quiet, even if it feels uneventful, even if it feels less intense than what you are used to. At first, this feels like a loss, like something is missing, but over time, something else begins to grow. A deeper form of aliveness, not based on chaos, but on clarity, not based on tension, but on presence. The nervous system begins to adjust. It stops expecting constant stimulation. It begins to recognize calm as safe, as stable, as enough. This is where real rest becomes possible. Because the mind is no longer searching for something to feel. It is no longer creating movement just to avoid stillness. It begins to settle naturally. There is also a quiet strength in this transition. You are no longer controlled by emotional spikes. You are no longer pulled into every internal wave. You begin to choose your state instead of reacting to it, and that choice brings stability. The night becomes different. Not a place where the mind needs to create intensity, but a place where it can finally release it. You lie down without needing something dramatic to happen inside, without needing to replay conflict, without needing to feel strong emotions just to feel alive, just calm, just steady, just present. And in that presence, something deeper begins to form. A sense of peace that is not dependent on highs or lows, a quiet aliveness that does not need chaos to exist. And as that becomes familiar, the old patterns begin to fade. The addiction to drama weakens, the need for intensity dissolves. And what remains is something far more stable. A mind that can be still without feeling empty. A body that can rest without searching for more. And in that stillness, sleep comes naturally, not as an escape from chaos, but as a continuation of calm. And as the need for emotional intensity begins to fade, something deeper, quieter, and more honest begins to rise. Not a distraction, not a surface-level thought, but something that has always been there, waiting beneath the noise, the dark, not just the absence of light, but the space where deeper questions live. Because when everything slows down, when there is no more movement, no more stimulation, no more emotional noise, the mind sometimes turns toward things it avoids during the day. Thoughts about existence, about being alone, about time passing, about things that cannot be controlled or fully understood. And in those moments, something inside tightens, not because anything is happening, but because something feels too real. This is where panic can quietly begin. Not loud at first, just a subtle unease, a feeling that you want to move away from this space, that you want to think about something else, that you want to escape back into distraction, because what you are touching feels heavy. But here is the truth. The dark is not creating these thoughts, it is revealing them. During the day there is no time to sit with these questions. Life moves too quickly. There is always something to do, something to focus on, something to avoid going deeper. But at night, when the layers fall away, the mind becomes aware of things that are always present, just not always acknowledged. And because they are unfamiliar, they feel threatening. Marcus Aurelius did not run from these thoughts. He turned toward them. He understood that fear grows when you avoid what is real. But when you face it calmly, when you look at it without exaggeration, something begins to change. The intensity fades, the fear softens, because what was unknown becomes understood. Meeting the dark without panic begins with this shift. You stop treating these thoughts as something dangerous and start seeing them as part of being human. The awareness of time, the awareness of life's limits, the awareness of being alone in certain ways. These are not signs that something is wrong. They are signs that you are conscious. And when you stop resisting them, they lose their sharp edge. The mind often reacts to these thoughts by trying to escape them. It creates noise. It shifts attention. It looks for something easier to hold on to. But this avoidance keeps the fear alive, because what you avoid remains unfamiliar, and what remains unfamiliar continues to feel threatening. Stoic contemplation offers a different path. You stay, not with fear, but with calm attention. You allow the thought to be there, without rushing away, without building a story around it, without turning it into something larger than it is. And slowly, something begins to shift. The thought becomes less overwhelming. The feeling becomes less intense, because you are no longer reacting to it, you are observing it. There is also a quiet grounding that comes from this. You begin to see that these thoughts, while deep, do not require immediate answers. They are not problems to solve. They are realities to understand. And understanding them does not require panic. It requires presence. You are here, in this moment, breathing, aware. And that is enough. You do not need to go beyond this moment to face these ideas. You only need to remain steady within it. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the nature of life and death, not to create fear, but to remove it. He reminded himself that everything follows a natural course, that life unfolds and ends as part of a larger order. And when you accept this, instead of resisting it, something within you relaxes. The fear loses its grip, because it is no longer something unknown, it is something understood. This does not make the thoughts disappear, but it changes your relationship with them. They no longer pull you into panic. They simply pass through your awareness, like any other thought. And in that shift, the night becomes less threatening. The dark becomes less heavy. It becomes a space, not of fear, but of depth. A place where you can sit with what is real, without needing to escape it. And as you lie there, allowing these thoughts to exist without reacting, something unexpected happens. The tension fades, the urgency disappears, the mind settles. Because it is no longer fighting what it cannot change. It is simply present, calm, steady. And in that steadiness, even the deepest thoughts lose their power to disturb you. They become quiet, distant, almost peaceful, and from that place, rest begins to return. Not because the dark disappeared, but because you learned how to meet it without fear. And as you begin to meet the deeper parts of the night without panic, something else quietly becomes clear. Even when you are calm, even when you are present, the mind still speaks. Thoughts still appear, some gentle, some sharp, some exaggerated, and in the darkness, they often feel more real than they actually are, because at night the mind can become dramatic. It takes a small concern and turns it into something urgent. It takes a simple thought and stretches it into a heavy story. It takes a passing fear and presents it as truth. And if you follow it, it pulls you with it. This is where many people get caught, not because of what is happening, but because of what they believe. Every thought feels important. Every idea feels meaningful. Every fear feels like something that must be solved immediately. But here is the quiet wisdom that changes everything. Not every thought deserves your trust. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the mind presents impressions, not facts. Thoughts arrive quickly, often without clarity, often shaped by emotion, memory, or habit. And if you accept them without question, they begin to shape how you feel, how you see, how you respond. But if you step back, if you create distance, something shifts. You begin to see the thought instead of becoming it. This is the practice. Not to stop thinking, but to stop believing everything you think. At night, this becomes especially important because the mind is more vulnerable to distortion. Fatigue lowers clarity. Silence amplifies emotion. And without awareness, thoughts can take on more weight than they deserve. A simple worry becomes a certainty. A passing doubt becomes a conclusion. A small fear becomes a prediction. And before you realize it, your entire state is shaped by something that was never fully true. Stoicism teaches you to pause in that moment. When a thought appears, you do not immediately follow it. You observe it. You ask quietly, is this true? Is this helpful? Is this something I need to engage with right now? Most of the time, the answer is no. And in that recognition, the thought begins to lose its power. It is no longer something you have to act on. It is simply something that passed through your mind. There is also a kind of freedom in this distance. You are no longer pulled by every mental impression. You are no longer reacting to every emotional wave. You begin to choose what you give your attention to, and that choice brings calm, because attention is what feeds thought. Without it, the thought fades. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. You are used to engaging, used to responding, used to following every idea to its end. But over time, you begin to see that not every thought leads somewhere useful. Some only create noise. Some only create tension. Some only repeat what you already know. And when you stop feeding them, the mind becomes quieter, not empty, but more stable. There is less movement, less urgency, less emotional pull, and this stability allows the body to relax, because it is no longer reacting to every signal. It is no longer bracing for something that is not actually happening. It begins to trust the quiet. This is the nightly wisdom, not in controlling the mind, but in not surrendering to it. You let thoughts come, you let them go. You remain steady, unmoved by what does not need your attention. And as you lie there and the mind presents its ideas, you simply watch, without judgment, without urgency, without belief, and slowly, the intensity fades, the thoughts lose their edge, the noise softens, because you are no longer giving it power, you are no longer turning every impression into truth. You are simply aware, calm, present, and in that awareness, the mind begins to settle naturally, not forced, not silenced, just quiet. Because it is no longer being believed without question. And in that quiet, rest finally becomes effortless. And as you begin to step back from every thought, another quiet habit comes into view, one that feels hopeful on the surface, but quietly keeps the mind unsettled. The belief that tomorrow will fix everything. It sounds harmless, even comforting. A silent promise the mind makes to itself. Things will be better tomorrow. I will feel different tomorrow. Everything will make sense tomorrow. And for a moment, that belief brings relief. But underneath, something else is happening. You are placing your peace in a moment that has not arrived. You are postponing calm, delaying rest, waiting for a future version of life to give you what you are not allowing yourself to feel now. This is how the mind keeps moving. Even at night, it reaches forward, holds on to tomorrow as a kind of rescue. as if the next day will arrive with answers, clarity, relief, and everything will finally settle. But tomorrow is not a solution. It is just another day. And if the mind is restless now, it will carry that restlessness forward. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He did not depend on the next day to bring him peace. He trained himself to find steadiness in the present moment, regardless of what was coming next, because he knew something simple: peace that depends on the future is never stable. There will always be another tomorrow, another condition, another reason to wait. And so the mind never truly rests. It stays in a quiet state of anticipation, always looking ahead, always hoping, always postponing. This is where the shift begins. You start to see that the need for tomorrow to fix things is a form of escape, not from life, but from the present moment, because something in the present feels uncomfortable, unclear, incomplete. And instead of sitting with that, the mind reaches forward. But reaching forward does not resolve what is here. It only delays it. Stoicism invites a different approach. You return to now. Not because everything is perfect, but because this is the only place where peace can actually exist. You stop asking tomorrow to save you, and start allowing yourself to be present, even in uncertainty, even in discomfort, even in incompleteness. At first, this feels difficult, because you are used to leaning on the future, used to believing that relief is always one step ahead. But slowly, something begins to change. You begin to notice that this moment is not as unbearable as the mind makes it seem. There is breath, there is stillness, there is space, and in that space, there is room for calm. You do not need tomorrow to feel this. You only need to stop leaving the present to search for it. There is also a quiet honesty in this realization. Tomorrow may bring change. It may bring clarity. It may bring something new, but it is not guaranteed to fix everything. And placing that expectation on it only creates more pressure, more waiting, more movement. But when you release that expectation, something softens. You no longer feel like you have to hold on until tomorrow. You no longer feel like relief is somewhere else. You begin to feel grounded here. And that grounding allows the mind to settle, because it is no longer stretched between now and what comes next. It is simply here, present, enough. So as you lie there, you gently let go of the idea that tomorrow will rescue you. Not because tomorrow does not matter, but because your peace does not need to wait for it. You allow the day to end without reaching forward. You allow the moment to be what it is, without trying to escape it. And in that stillness, something quiet begins to form. A sense of calm that does not depend on what comes next. A sense of rest that exists before anything changes. And as that calm deepens, the mind finally stops waiting, stops searching, stops reaching, and begins to rest right where you are. And as you begin to release the idea that tomorrow must save you, another quiet belief begins to surface, one that has shaped how you move through every day and how you struggle to rest at night. The belief that your worth is tied to what you produce. It does not always speak loudly, but it is always there. Measuring, comparing, asking a silent question at the end of the day. Was it enough? Did you do enough? Did you move forward or fall behind? And if the answer feels uncertain, the mind does not settle, because rest begins to feel undeserved. There is a subtle tension that forms when productivity becomes more than a tool, when it becomes identity. You are no longer just doing things, you are becoming what you do. Your value begins to rise and fall with your output. And when the day ends without meeting that internal standard, something inside you resists letting go. It keeps reviewing, replaying, pushing, as if sleep must be earned, as if rest must be justified. Marcus Aurelius did not define himself by constant output. He acted with discipline, yes. He fulfilled his responsibilities, yes. But he did not measure his worth by how much he produced in a single day. He measured it by how aligned he was with his values, by the quality of his actions, not the quantity. This is where the shift begins. You start to see that productivity is not the same as worth. It is something you do, not something you are. But when the two become connected, rest becomes difficult, because the mind never feels complete. There is always more to do, more to improve, more to fix. And so even when the body is tired, the mind keeps pushing. It keeps searching for one more task, one more thought, one more way to feel like the day was justified. But this is a loop that never ends, because no amount of doing can fully satisfy a mind that believes it must prove its value. Stoicism offers a different foundation. Your worth is not created by your output. It is expressed through your character, through how you think, how you act, how you respond to what is in front of you. This changes the entire relationship with rest. Because rest is no longer something you earn, it becomes something you allow. A natural part of being human, not a reward for performance. There is also a quiet exhaustion that comes from over-identifying with productivity, the constant need to measure, to evaluate, to improve. It keeps the mind active, even when there is nothing left to do. And at night, this shows up as restlessness, the feeling that you should still be doing something, even when there is nothing to do. Letting go of this begins with a simple recognition. The day is over, not because everything is complete, but because time has moved. And your role now is not to produce, but to rest. This is not laziness, it is balance. The same discipline that allows you to work must also allow you to stop, and stopping requires trust. Trust that you are enough even when you are not producing. Trust that your value does not disappear when you are still. Trust that rest does not take away from your progress. It supports it. When this trust begins to grow, something shifts. The pressure eases, the constant measuring fades, the need to justify the day begins to dissolve, and the mind starts to settle, because it is no longer trying to prove anything. There is also a deeper sense of freedom here. You are no longer bound to a standard that never fully satisfies. You are no longer chasing a feeling of enough that always moves further away. You begin to feel enough before the next task, before the next goal, before the next day. And in that feeling, rest becomes natural, not forced, not delayed, just allowed. So as you lie there, you begin to release the need to measure your worth by what you did today. You allow the day to end without turning it into a test. You allow yourself to be without needing to produce. And in that space, something quiet begins to return. A sense of value that does not depend on output. A sense of calm that does not depend on achievement. Just you, as you are, enough without needing to do anything more. And in that realization, the mind finally stops pushing, stops proving, stops performing, and begins to rest. Not as something earned, but as something always available when you stop making productivity your master. And as you begin to release the need to prove your worth through productivity, another, quieter truth begins to surface. Not about what you did, but about how you treated yourself while doing it. Because sometimes the exhaustion you feel at night is not from effort, it is from abandonment, not by others, but by you. There is a subtle way people move through the day where they slowly step away from themselves. They ignore what they feel, they silence what they need. They say yes when something inside them says no. They adjust, adapt, and perform until their own voice becomes faint. And by the time the day ends, they are no longer fully with themselves. They have been present for everything else, except their own truth. This is where the tension begins, not loud, not obvious, but persistent, because something inside you knows. It knows when you went against yourself. It knows when you ignored what mattered to you. It knows when you chose comfort, approval, or avoidance over honesty. And that knowing does not disappear at night. It follows you, quietly, into the stillness. This is why rest can feel difficult, even when nothing seems wrong, because part of you feels disconnected, not from the world, but from yourself. Marcus Aurelius understood the importance of remaining aligned with one's inner voice. He did not expect perfection, but he valued integrity, acting in a way that reflects what you know is right, even in small moments, because each time you do that, you stay connected to yourself. And that connection creates peace. But when you move through the day abandoning that connection, something begins to fracture. You feel it as unease, as restlessness, as a subtle discomfort you cannot fully explain. Because it is not about what happened externally, it is about what happened internally. You stepped away from yourself, and now the mind cannot fully settle. The Stoic path does not ask you to judge yourself harshly for this. It asks you to see it clearly, without excuses, without exaggeration, just awareness. Where did you ignore your truth? Where did you silence your needs? Where did you act out of pressure instead of alignment? This is not to create guilt. It is to restore connection, because once you see it, you can return. The rare strength is not in never abandoning yourself. It is in noticing when you did and choosing to come back, to realign, to listen again, to respect that inner voice that you may have ignored during the day. And that return begins gently. You do not need to fix everything tonight. You do not need to correct every moment. You simply acknowledge it, honestly, calmly, without turning it into a story about your worth, because your worth is not defined by a single day. But your peace is influenced by your alignment. When you begin to return to yourself in this way, something shifts. The inner tension softens. The feeling of disconnection fades. Because you are no longer ignoring what is true, you are facing it, and facing it restores integrity. There is also a quiet relief in this. You no longer need to pretend. You no longer need to carry the weight of actions that did not feel right. You begin to feel whole again, not because everything was perfect, but because you are willing to be honest with yourself. And honesty creates calm. Because there is nothing left to hide, nothing left to avoid, nothing left pulling you away from yourself. So as you lie there, you begin to reconnect, not through force, but through awareness. You return to your own center. You allow yourself to feel what you ignored. You allow yourself to recognize where you stepped away. And in that recognition, you begin to come back. Back to alignment, back to clarity, back to yourself. And in that return, something settles deeply. Because the mind no longer feels divided. It no longer feels like it has to manage a distance within. It feels whole, grounded, at peace. And from that place, rest becomes possible again. Not because everything outside is resolved, but because you are no longer separated from who you are inside. And as you begin to return to yourself, Without abandoning your inner voice, another layer quietly becomes visible, not in what you do, but in what you hold on to. Because the mind is not only tired from effort, it is tired from attachment. There are so many small things you carry without noticing. Expectations about how people should act, ideas about how life should unfold, emotional ties to outcomes, recognition, control, certainty, and each one pulls on your attention, quietly, constantly. You may not feel them during the day, but at night, you feel all of them at once. Every attachment becomes a thread, and your mind is pulled in different directions. This is why rest feels difficult. Not because the mind is weak, but because it is holding too much. Every demand creates tension. Every expectation creates pressure. Every emotional dependency creates movement. And when all of these are active at the same time, the mind cannot settle. Marcus Aurelius practiced something simple but powerful. He loosened his grip, not on effort, not on values, but on outcomes, on how things should go, on how people should behave, on what must happen for him to feel at peace. He understood that the tighter you hold, the more you suffer, because life does not always match your grip. And when it doesn't, the mind resists. It tightens further, it demands more, it pulls harder, and this creates unrest. Stoicism teaches a different approach. Not detachment from life, but detachment from control. You still care, you still act, you still engage, but you do not attach your peace to the result. You do not make your calm dependent on things outside your reach. This is what creates lightness. A mind that is not constantly pulling is a mind that can rest. But when you are attached to many things, the mind stays active. It checks, it monitors, it waits, it reacts, because it is invested, and investment without awareness turns into tension. This is why inner peace requires fewer attachments, not fewer experiences, not fewer relationships, but fewer demands placed on them. You begin to notice what you are holding on to, where you are expecting something to go a certain way, where you are depending on something external to feel stable, and instead of tightening your grip, you gently loosen it. You allow things to be uncertain. You allow people to be as they are. You allow outcomes to unfold without trying to control every step. At first, this feels uncomfortable, because the mind is used to holding, used to managing, used to trying to secure its sense of calm through control. But slowly, something begins to shift. You feel lighter, less pulled, less tense, because you are no longer carrying so many invisible demands. There is also a quiet freedom in this. You are no longer tied to every outcome. You are no longer waiting for things to go a certain way before you can feel at ease. You begin to feel calm, even in uncertainty, even in incompleteness, even in situations that are still unfolding. This is the Stoic lightness of grip. You hold what matters, but you do not cling to it. You care, but you do not depend. You engage, but you do not attach your peace to the result. And in that balance, the mind begins to settle, because there is less to manage, less to control, less to hold on to. So as you lie there, you begin to notice the attachments that are still active, the expectations, the demands, the emotional ties, and one by one, you loosen them, not by force, but by understanding that your peace does not require them. And as your grip softens, something inside you begins to relax. The tension fades, the pull disappears, the mind becomes quiet, because it is no longer being stretched in different directions. It is simply here, light, unburdened, at rest. And in that lightness, sleep comes naturally, not because everything is perfect, but because nothing is being held too tightly anymore. And as your grip on things begins to loosen, another pattern quietly reveals itself, not from what is happening, but from what the mind begins to imagine. Because in the darkness, the mind does not always stay with reality. It moves ahead, and it builds. There is a certain kind of thinking that appears at night, subtle at first, a small concern, a simple uncertainty, but then it grows. It stretches into possibilities. It connects one fear to another, and before you realize it, the mind is no longer thinking. It is predicting, and what it predicts is rarely calm. This is catastrophizing, the quiet habit of turning uncertainty into disaster. The mind begins to say, "What if this goes wrong? What if everything falls apart? What if I can't handle it?" And instead of stopping there, it continues. It builds a full picture, a future that has not happened but feels real. And the more it builds, the more the body reacts. Tension rises, the breath shortens, the mind feels urgent, as if something must be solved immediately. But nothing is actually happening, only thought. Marcus Aurelius understood that the mind often exaggerates what it does not understand. It takes something unclear and fills it with fear, not because the situation demands it, but because the mind is trying to prepare itself. But this preparation becomes distortion. It loses proportion. A small risk becomes a certainty, a possibility becomes a conclusion, and the night becomes filled with imagined outcomes that have no grounding in the present. This is where Stoic reasoning begins to restore balance. You do not fight the thought. You examine it. You step back and look at it clearly. What is actually happening right now? Most of the time, the answer is simple: nothing. You are lying down. You are safe. There is no immediate threat. And yet the mind is reacting as if there is. This is the first break in the cycle. You separate the thought from reality. You recognize that the feeling is coming from imagination, not from the present moment. This does not mean the concern is invalid. It means it is not urgent. It does not need to be solved in this moment. Then you bring in proportion. Instead of asking, "What if everything goes wrong?" you ask, "What is most likely?" Not the worst-case scenario. Not the extreme, but the realistic. And often, the realistic answer is far less intense than what the mind created. This reduces the emotional charge, because the mind is no longer dealing with extremes. It is grounded again. There is also perspective. You remind yourself of what you have already faced, the situations you thought would overwhelm you, but didn't, the moments you feared, but moved through. You see that your mind has created these scenarios before, and they did not unfold the way it predicted. This weakens the trust you place in catastrophic thinking, because you begin to see the pattern. It feels real, but it is not reliable. This is the Stoic cure, not to eliminate thought, but to reduce its distortion, to bring it back into alignment with reality, with proportion, with reason. And as you do this, something shifts. The urgency fades. The imagined future loses its grip. The body begins to relax, because it is no longer responding to something that feels immediate. It returns to what is actually here. There is also a quiet discipline in not following the thought further. The mind will try to continue. It will offer more scenarios, more what-ifs, more reasons to stay engaged. But you do not need to follow. You can let the thought stop where it is, without building on it, without adding to it. And in that stopping, the cycle breaks. So as you lie there and the mind begins to predict disaster, you notice it. You step back. You return to what is real, you bring in reason, you restore proportion, and slowly the intensity fades. The mind quiets. Because it is no longer feeding on extremes. It is grounded, clear, steady. And in that steadiness, the night becomes calm again, not because the future is certain, but because the mind is no longer turning uncertainty into fear. Just present, just aware, just at rest. And now, something quiet begins to settle. You've walked through the noise, the pressure, the weight you didn't even realize you were carrying. You've seen how the mind fights, clings, predicts, replays, and how slowly it can learn to release. Because rest was never just about sleep. It was about letting go of control, letting go of perfection, letting go of who you think you need to be, and returning to who you already are when nothing is being demanded from you. A mind that does not chase every thought finally becomes still. A heart that does not depend on tomorrow finally becomes calm. A soul that stops holding everything finally becomes light. This is what Marcus Aurelius understood, that peace is not found by escaping life, but by seeing it clearly and refusing to carry what was never yours to hold. So tonight, you don't need to solve everything. You don't need to become anything. You don't need to win, prove, or fix. You only need to release. And let the mind return to its natural state, quiet, steady, at rest. If you made it this far, write in the comments, "I choose peace." That way, I know you're not just listening, you're practicing. And if this gave you even a moment of clarity tonight, subscribe to the channel and stay close to this kind of wisdom, because the world will always be loud, but you can always return to quiet. And I'll see you in the next one.